Hey everyone, this is What If Fan bringing you another part of What If Transmigrated as Harry Potter. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name in the description below. Please make sure to support the creator. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also, a quick update, there's only one more part left in the story. What if Ichigo had a different Zanpakuto before we fully catch up with the author? So once again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the next project should be on this channel. I'm currently deciding between these three fanfics. What if sign-in system in high school DxD? What if Ichigo awoke his true powers? What if Mangaka in One Piece world? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next on the channel. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 11, The First Task P2. The crowd screamed, yelled and made all possible hellish sounds possible. In between, Harry could make out some broken commentary from Ludo Bagman. The words like daring and wicked were thrown around from time to time. Harry couldn't gauge what exactly was going on other than the fact that the crowd was suitably entertained. Then the crowd fell silent and for a time there was very little sound other than a few garbled commentaries. Then the whistle struck again and it was Fleur's turn. Harry watched as the French champion stepped up to her task. Then the waiting began. Same as before, the crowd went ballistic at Fleur's entrance and from there it went on. Harry sat straight and fished out his wand from his wand holder. Just to be on the safe side, he began applying flame-repelling charms on his body as well as his clothes. He also decided to do away with the cloak. While he didn't expect to move around a lot, he wasn't leaving anything to luck. The cloak could prove detrimental when the task commenced. With that in mind, he applied a shrinking charm on the cloak and placed it safely in his pocket. With the cloak gone, he was dressed in his pants and shirt with a sweater on top. Soon Fleur's task came to a speedy conclusion. Then it was Crumb's turn. Harry didn't have to wait too long before he heard the thundering applause and then a relative silence. He waited for his turn patiently while his mind went through the spells he was going to use. The whistle came, signaling for his entry. Finally, he muttered before he walked forward. The moment he stepped away from the tent, he noticed the fences and trees that surrounded him. The great enclosure was filled with people he barely recognized. There were too many to focus on, and he dared not focus on people when the yellow eyes of an apex predator was watching his every move. The distance between Harry and the dragon was not that much, but it was workable. The sheer size of the dragon gave him a pause though. No amount of practice sessions with stone golems in the RR did any justice to the true Hungarian horntail he was facing. This was indeed the most powerful and dangerous dragon in the world. Despite the instinct of fear drilled into his being, he walked forward. He took clear measured steps and wanted to see what would provoke the dragon. The moment he approached a certain distance, the dragon let out a soul-chilling roar, and he could even make out a few cries of despair from the audience. The dragon all of a sudden reared itself and launched a torrent of fire straight in his direction. Harry's movement was swift. With the holly wand in his palm pointed downwards, he made a small spin with his magic thrumming through his veins. The pure rush of magic was incredible, especially when he watched as the flames of the dragon drowned his shield. Indomitus. The shield spell was so difficult to perform but so useful as well. He could feel the sheer magical energy it took to construct the shield, but he has been practicing this spell for a while now. The Patronus charm felt more difficult than this one. Now, it's time to show this dragon who's running the show, he thought, flickering his wand at the energy barrier protecting him. The kinetic force behind the jet of flames was turned outwards in a single concentrated blast, and the flames were smashed away, if only for a while. But that was the opportunity he was looking for. Eventrum Ventus. The next spell was an air elemental spell that pulled a mini cyclone out of the tip of his wand. The hot air and the remaining fire from the horntail were blown right back towards the dragon under a powerful pressurized wind. The dragon reeled back, but he doubted the dragon was hurt in any sense. But the dragon's focus was shifted, and that was his window of opportunity. He could hear the roar of approval from the crowd, and Ludo Bagman was excitably shouting from wherever the man was commentating. Harry raised his wand towards the sky and pictured the spell in his mind. Tridenti Fons. The tip of his wand glowed with a blue aura and a blue trident fired off into the sky. The trident followed a parabolic path and its 3 prongs separated mid-air, striking before the dragon in the ground. What was that spell? Our young champion seems to have overcome the flames of the dragon and is now attempting another spell. Bagman excitedly chatted away. Oh, look! There is something happening on the ground. Bagman excitedly added. Trident Fawns, a spell used very commonly in deserts by ancient wizards and witches to conjure springs of water. It is said, the spell originated from ancient Greece when a wizard and witch competed to be the patron of a city. To be precise, the spell has connections to the myth behind Poseidon and Athena's struggle to become the patron of Athens. Poseidon is said to have gifted Athenians a salt spring while Athena supposedly gave them an olive tree. Without fire, there is no smoke. Harry thought, as the ground before his eyes rumbled, and water began to sprout out in abundance. Every myth has a pinch of truth buried deep inside. But, myth and truth held no sway in the present situation. Only magic matters. Magic is might, Harry discerned, as water began to flood the enclosure. Flooding the enclosure was not his plan. Why would he drown himself? The water was only the first part, now comes the hard part. Harry raised his wand and added a full clockwise spin. Sug Fugio. It was the first water spell he practiced when he decided elemental magic was the way forward to combat a dragon. He had repeatedly tried to make the spell more efficient, but he was not at a level where he could pull water out in an explosive torrent from the tip of his wand. That left him with a sole option. Use 2 spells. One was for pulling water in large quantities while the other manipulates said water as a weapon. The tip of his holly wand shines silver blue and the water before him converged into a storm of swirling mass. A sharp jab with his wand saw to it the water surged forward and struck the horntail head-on. The Hungarian horntail let out a bellow of anger as it took on an element of nature. But, Harry was nowhere near finished. He focused the spell so that much of the water was dragged out into the open upon the dragon before he let the spell fail. Now, water alone was only going to annoy the dragon. He could already see the horntail was largely unbothered except for the fact that it was using its tail and wings to shield itself from the onslaught of his spell. To truly make an impact on the dragon, a mere water spell was not enough. It required one more spell. Pruin Ventus. Frosty gales of wind blasted out of the tip of his wand. It helped the climate was damp and cold as his spell was positively reinforced by nature itself. The dragon was now feeling the effects of his spell. Along its thick scales, frost began to form up as the water solidified in an instant. Sure, the dragon was not going to shiver to death or anything, but Harry could already see the dragon was reeling under this swift turn of temperature. Harry could hear Bagman enthusiastically describing the spells and their effects to the crowd. Frankly, the man had his work cut out for him as the crowd was screaming so loud he could feel pain in his ears. Keeping that aside, this was his perfect chance as the horntail was sufficiently distracted and weakened. Transfiguration was not his strong suit, but there are ways around transfiguration and still use its effects to his advantage. He dipped his mind into his inventory of spells and pulled out a charm that was suitable for the situation. Avis. A flock of golden-colored birds appeared out of the tip of his wand, circling his head. Oh, look, folks. Mr. Potter has used the bird conjuring charm. What is he planning? Harry heard a snippet of the enthusiastic commentary of Bagman. Indeed, many would wonder why he was conjuring small birds, but they can grow, right? Ingorgo Maxima. He felt a considerable drain on his magic, but he paid it no mind. This task was nearing its end. The small birds grew to the size of horses. There were 7 giant birds circling above him, and the horntail clearly felt threatened by them. Finally, Mr. Horntail. Our encounter is coming to an end and you can go bother someone else. Harry thought as he held both his hands up, gripping the handle of his wand, and jabbed in the direction of the dragon, uttering another spell. A puño. The effect of the spell was instantaneous. The giant golden birds shot through the air like bullets and began to hound the dragon, and that was Harry's chance. Accio golden egg. Unfortunately, the egg didn't make a move. He could hear Bagman saying the egg was covered with anti-summoning charms. The only reason he didn't begin with the Ichigo spell the moment he entered the enclosure was that he feared the dragon would snap at the egg and somehow damage it. If the egg is damaged, he may lose points. Even if Ichigo didn't work, he held another spell at hand. This time he was dipping into Transfiguration. He channeled his magic into his wand and began spinning his wand high in the air above his head. Sparks began to come out of his wand, but he continued feeding the spell more magic before jabbing straight at the egg. Riata Laqueum. A long lasso sprung from the tip of his wand and he expended his magic, directing the lasso all the way towards the golden egg, where it quickly proceeded to curl around the egg. When he was sure he had the egg secured, he made a sharp pull with his wand and the egg sprung out of the dragon's nest. He quickly dismissed the lasso and used the levitation charm to slowly guide the egg into his grasp. "Look at that!" Bagman was yelling. "Will you look at that? Our youngest champion is the quickest to get his egg. Well, this is going to shorten the odds on Mr. Potter." Harry could hear the whole enclosure shaking with applause and he hastily stepped back with the golden egg in hand, his task completed. He promptly dismissed the conjuration of birds attacking the dragon as well. The last he saw before he stepped back into the tent, the dragon handlers were surrounding the horntail. Harry blinked twice as he looked at the golden egg in his hand. "I've done it," Harry absently whispered as a smile bloomed across his face. This was proof of his resilience, and above that, his ability to triumph greater odds. The tent's flaps were ruffled as Professor McGonagall, Hagrid and Moody rushed in. "That was excellent, Potter," cried McGonagall. "Such brilliant piece of magic and an excellent use of transfiguration." "Ya did it, Harry," said Hagrid with watery eyes. "Ya did it. Against a horntail of all dragons." "Thanks, Hagrid," said Harry. Moody looked visibly pleased but otherwise remained silent. "You'll need to see Madame Pomfrey before the judges give out your score," said McGonagall as she led him out of the enclosure towards another tent. Inside the tent, Madame Pomfrey was rushing about looking over the other champions. She looked up when they entered the tent. "Dragons!" Harry heard her hiss out the word in disgust. Before he could say anything, he was pulled into a cubicle and the Hogwarts healer began waving her wand over his body. "I wasn't injured." But Madame Pomfrey ignored him completely. Last year it was Dementors and mass murderers. This year it was dragons. What are they going to bring into this school next? A Nundu? It seems you are lucky to have escaped any injury, although you could use some replenishment. Your magic has drained considerably." Madame Pomfrey rushed out of the cubicle and returned with a potion. "Drink," she ordered. He didn't complain and drained the potion in one go. Immediately he could feel a rush of energy filling him up. "Now, just sit there quietly and let the potion run its course. Afterwards, you can go get your score," said Pomfrey before rushing out of his cubicle to Cedric's. Harry sat in that cubicle looking at the golden egg sitting innocently by his bedside. He waited patiently for a few minutes before Professor McGonagall came to fetch him. It was time for his score to be declared. When Harry stepped out of the tent, he saw Hermione and Ron standing outside. "Harry, you were brilliant," cried Hermione as she hired him. "It was amazing. The most brilliant magic I have ever seen." "Thanks, Hermione. Thank you for helping me all this time." "Couldn't have done it without you," said Harry, hugging her back. "Harry," called Ron, looking pale. "I reckon someone is looking to do you in." The understatement of this century. "I don't have time for this right now," Harry muttered hoarsely, overcome with adrenaline at his victory. "Harry!" He ignored Hermione's cry in favor of McGonagall waving him forward towards the enclosure where the judges were waiting for him. When he stepped into the enclosure, he was greeted with thunderous applause from the crowd. He gave a brief bow in appreciation and straightened up to face the judges. Madame Maxime raised her wand in the air. A long purple ribbon shot out of her wand and twisted itself into the number 10. The crowd applauded her decision. Then came Mr. Crouch, who also gave a 10, which was followed by Dumbledore and Ludo Bagman. The crowd got more and more wilder in their celebration, especially from the Hogwarts side. It had seemed his performance had managed to rouse his peers and forget house boundaries. Finally, it was Karkaroff's turn and the prick awarded him 4 points. The crowd immediately booed and began shouting obscenities at Karkaroff. Even if Karkaroff decided to be a sore loser, Harry was happy. He had taken revenge in advance against Karkaroff in the Forbidden Forest. The man had walked funny when he saw him the next day, and that was enough for him. With 44 points, you are leading the tournament, Harry. You won, said Neville, who had come down to congratulate him along with the Quidditch team and a better part of Hogwarts. Yeah. If it wasn't for you, Hogwarts would have been left in the dust, said Katie Bell. Now, that confused him. Yeah. Diggory lost the whole thing. He didn't manage to take the egg. If it wasn't for you, said Terry Boot of Ravenclaw. Cedric lost? Harry asked in surprise. He had thought the Hogwarts champion had a 60% chance of completing the first task. Anyway, it didn't bother him much. This whole tournament was just a prelude to the Second War. A total sham orchestrated by Voldemort and his pet Death Eater. Yeah. We would have been humiliated before those dark wizards of Durmstrang if it wasn't for you, Harry, said Justin Finch Fletchley. Justin was one of the few Hufflepuffs who had interacted with him cordially this year, even after his name came out of the goblet. The blonde-haired boy had wrongly accused him in the second year, as the heir of Slytherin, and when it was proven to be untrue, Justin had apologized to him. Since then, they had a good camaraderie of sorts, only to be shaken again this year. Yeah. Look at their Death Eater headmaster. He should be in Azkaban, not leading a wizarding school. I suppose, with Durmstrang's reputation, he is a good fit for those sorry lot, growled Ernie Macmillan. Ernie was a somewhat reserved boy from Hufflepuff. Harry hardly knew the boy except for the fact that Ernie is a dab hand at charms. Harry didn't know much about Ernie and so far had little interaction with the boy. Congratulations poured in from other houses. He even shook hands with a few sixth-year and first-year Slytherins. It had seemed house boundaries were indeed breaking down a bit, which was a good thing. He was sure, however, that this won't last beyond this year. Next year, everybody will be back to normal, or as normal as it could get in the wizarding world. Surrounded by well-wishers and praises, he didn't fail to notice the presence of Rita Skeeter and her cameraman. He nodded at the witch and in time managed to extract himself from the crowd. It was time to capitalize on the tide that was going to crest just as he planned. Chapter 12, Plans in Making. When Harry stepped into the chamber, he had to immediately duck his head as pieces of glass and metal flew around the chamber. He immediately surrounded himself with a shield as he saw a piece of furniture flying towards him. The wooden furniture lay broken on the floor courtesy of his shield. Sorry, cried Sirius, whom Harry noted to be jumping around the chamber trying to avoid the airborne utilities in the former lair of the basilisk. What is going on? Harry shouted over the chaos. He flinched when a piece of glass fried up against his shield. I tried to rearrange the room with this bloody wand and this is the result. Sirius complained, ducking down as Splintered would try to smack his head. Knowing what he had to do, Harry dismissed the shield and swished his wand in a full circle above his head. Finite. The air rippled with magic and the chaos inside the chamber came to a stop. The items began to return to their previous place and he supplemented the spell with the Reparo charm. In a few seconds, the chamber and its contents were restored back to their normal state. That wand is not working well for you, huh? Asked Harry. It's a fine wand for sophisticated spells. However, wide area spells are not its forte, said Sirius with a shrug. Harry was pulled into a hug. Initially surprised, he was quick to recover and patted Sirius on the back. Saw how you dealt with the Hungarian horntail. You did great, Harry. James and Lily would be proud. Sirius murmured. Wait. Harry pulled back from the hug to look accusingly at Sirius. What do you mean by that? Don't tell me you showed up in your animagus form at the enclosure. I didn't. You were adamant that I don't come along, so I did this, said Sirius, fishing out two identical mirrors. Using these and with some creative help of Winky, I was able to see everything. What is this? Asked Harry, taking one of the mirrors into his hand. The mirror felt warm to his touch. This is what I call a two-way mirror. I'm still working on some spells to improve it, but look, said Sirius, while tapping both mirrors with the tip of his wand. The mirror in Harry's hand let out vibration and his face was replaced to show Sirius, who was looking into the other mirror. You had Winky bring the mirror to the enclosure and watched everything from here? Harry asked. Yes. A neat trick, isn't it? Asked Sirius with a satisfied smile. Brilliant. You came up with this in one day? Asked Harry, more than impressed by the idea and the work done by Sirius. Your mother and I were working on this project to keep in contact, you know. Your mother was a brilliant witch, Harry. She designed half the spells I used on the mirrors. We never figured out how to work the mirrors around the protection of Fidelia's charm. If only I had figured that out, I could've. Sirius trailed off, misty-eyed and his tone somber. Both of us won't be able to change the past, no matter how much we wish it so. The only thing we can do and should do is to focus on the present and plan for the future, said Harry, trying to console Sirius, who he was sure suffering from survivor's guilt. You have changed, Sirius observed. When Harry raised his eyebrow questioningly, Sirius merely laughed it off. You are more mature than I was, or James for that matter, at your age. The only things on our minds were the plans for our next prank. Well, James was always obsessed with your mother more than anything else. Those were the days. Sirius trailed off with a faraway look on his face. You should really take a shave. You look the part of an escaped convict, said Harry, trying to change the subject. I'm an escaped convict, Sirius reminded him. Not exactly. You were never convicted. Semantics, Harry. For the world at large I'm guilty, said Sirius. Perceptions can change, said Harry before taking out an envelope from his pocket and offered it to Sirius. What's this? Asked Sirius, accepting the envelope, which he noted to have a broken seal. A writ petition to quash any and all legal proceeding against you on the basis of your unique circumstances, said Harry. Sirius looked struck for a moment and looked at Harry as if seeing him for the first time. Harry, how did you? Forget about anything else. Just read the papers and sign them. There are 2 petitions inside. One for the British DMLE, contesting the ministry's claim you are a criminal or a convict based on the fact that you remain in remand custody pending trial for more than 12 years. The other is for the ICW court, to quash the entire case on the basis of your lack of trial and your extended stay on that barbaric place the British ministry call a prison, said Harry. Sirius once again opened his mouth to say something but then thought better off it. Instead, Sirius began to read the 2 parchments he drew from the envelope. I contacted Gilbert, Poole, and Tonks in regards to your case. Your cousin Andromeda Tonks contacted me this morning, but I put it off in favor of the first task. She says she won't be able to reverse the ministry's charges against you permanently. But she can suspend them temporarily in favor of demanding a trial. You will have to appear before a full Wisingamot. Is that even possible? Asked Sirius in surprise. You are the last living Black. You are Lord Black and you have been kept in Azkaban without a trial for 12 years. Your ascension to the head of House Black is more than enough to strong-arm the ministry to give you a full court hearing. The other lords of Wisingamot won't deny the trial as it represents a dangerous precedent if you are denied a fair trial. Malfoy and his cronies will be snubbed no matter how much they try to overturn the trial. I genuinely can't believe this is happening. How did you do all this, Harry? Asked Sirius with wide eyes. Nothing has happened yet. But I will see you walk free at any cost, said Harry. Harry, you don't know the ministry as well as I do. They won't reverse their decisions that easily. If we had that filthy rat. Sirius trailed off. Don't worry about any of that. The ministry will give you a trial. If they won't, I have a plan for that scenario as well. Harry promised. Harry walked out of the chamber with Sirius's signature. Having Sirius declared a free man was his priority, and he was adamant for that to happen before the 4th year ends. While he certainly doesn't expect Dumbledore to be all-knowing, the mere fact that Sirius alone was denied a trial was spooky. At least, that's what Andromeda Tonks had written to him in her letter. If Andromeda is right, and he has no reason to disbelieve her, then either Dumbledore was plain ignorant or the old man just turned a blind eye, as Sirius was a wild element on the board. With Sirius thrown in prison, Dumbledore had a free hand in throwing Harry to the tender mercies of the Dursleys. Speaking of the Dursleys, he made a mental note to give them a warm present for abusing a helpless child. There are vivid memories of what the original Harry went through at the back of his mind. All the physical abuse and mental torture have to be repaid in kind. Justice demanded that he do so. At the same time, he didn't want to hurt Dudley Dursley. The kid's only crime was being born to Petunia and Vernon Dursley. I'll have to think of something for the Dursleys. At the same time, it should not be too harsh to affect Dudley. Or maybe, Dudley could use some trouble in his life to set him straight. The Gryffindor common room was packed with students. Harry could barely take 2 steps before he was surrounded by well-wishers, handshakes, and whatnot. Professor McGonagall has apparently turned a blind eye to the celebration that was going on. The prefects who were supposed to keep everything in order were enjoying the party as well. He saw all sorts of activities going on and he was forced to participate in or witness each one of them. There was the poetic retelling of how the other champions fared against their dragons. Lee Jordan was the orator and Harry was suitably impressed by Lee's imaginative and oftentimes funny retelling. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas worked themselves up to portray Cedric Diggory and his transfigured rooster. Apparently, Cedric had transfigured several stones to roosters to distract the dragon. It didn't work too well for the Hufflepuff seeker. The dragon was more than capable of assessing the threat posed by a rooster to be non-existent and focused on Cedric instead. The Weasley twins, on the other hand, were up to their usual antics. Those two stormed the common room with a collection of prank items. There were these berries that let someone breathe fire out of their nostrils. Canary creams that turn anyone into a giant canary upon eating them. The Weasley twins were ingenious and unpredictable with their inventions. Harry found Neville, who was sporting a mini elephant trunk on his somewhat chubby face. "You okay, Neville?" asked Harry. "I'm fine, Harry." "I think it's funny," said Neville. "It's funny. Too bad you don't have the tusks." "That would have been cool," said Parvati Patil, laughing with Lavender Brown. "That's a good idea, Parvati," said George. "Yeah, we will add that in the future," said Fred. "Hey, Harry." Hermione also joined them with Ron, who was lagging behind Hermione awkwardly. "Hey, Hermione," he greeted back. "So, I can't help but notice there are too much food and drinks." "Where did all this come from?" asked Hermione. "Where does all the food and drinks in Hogwarts come from?" said George rhetorically. "The house elves," answered Fred with a bright smile. Then Fred widened his eyes and began exaggeratedly shaking his head. "What else, good Mr. Weasley, sirs? Love those creatures. They are the best minions one could ask for. Right, George?" "Right you are, Fred," said George. "Say, you wouldn't know where the kitchen is, would you?" asked Hermione innocently. "Yeah, sure. A concealed door behind the painting of a bowl of fruit on the first floor." Fred stopped and looked suspicious at Hermione. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," said Hermione, a tad too quickly. "Going to incite rebellion among them, are you?" "You going to use those leaflets of yours, are you?" asked George. "Good luck trying to do that. They love doing chores. The more work a house elf have, the merrier they become," said Fred. Hermione just pursed her lips. One could see she was drawing up plans behind her eyes. Truth be told, Harry was not exactly opposed to Hermione's general idea to have a welfare system for the house elves. Those creatures were dead useful, not to mention the best loyal companion one could get. The house elves ought to be treated with dignity and they ought to be compensated in some form for their work. But that doesn't mean he was entirely comfortable with Hermione's idea of liberating house elves. If such a powerful race of creatures prefers serving wizards and witches, there must be something going on in the background. He was sure there was some piece of the puzzle he was missing. Why else would house elves only serve wizards and witches? Why don't they just serve other magical races like goblins, vampires, centaurs, etc.? What is so unique about wizards and witches that the house elves find appealing enough to bound themselves in servitude? Harry? Ron meekly called. Harry's first instinct was to ignore the annoying redhead, but then thought better of it. If he continued to ignore Ron, the attempts to rekindle their broken friendship will only persist in the coming days. For the sake of avoiding any future drama and recognizing that he was dealing with a 14-year-old kid, Harry decided to wrap the issue then and there. "What's up, Ron?" "Harry, I'm sorry," said Ron with his ears turning beet red. "Okay." Harry nodded. "So, we are fine." "I mean, you aren't mad?" stuttered Ron. "If my memory serves me right, you were the one who went mad and threw a temper tantrum. You accused me of lying and cheating, remember?" I'm sorry, Harry." "I don't know what else to say," said Ron. "I don't want you to say anything. Just remember that each of us has our own problems, and I hardly got to choose the problems that I'm getting saddled with." "I'm so sorry, Harry. I was just angry and frustrated. Forgive me, Harry." Harry let out a sigh and shook hands with Ron. The boy was just too young for him to do anything else. In time, Ron could overcome his faults on his own. "I may forgive, but I won't forget. I can't afford to when I'm facing enemies from all sides." Harry thought even as he joined the party in earnest. Chapter 13, The Scroots. "When were you going to tell me you were going to do this?" asked Hermione in a cross manner while sticking the front page of the Daily Prophet into his face. On the front page, there was the clear recording of Harry's encounter with Pettigrew plastered under a sizable headline that read, "Peter Pettigrew is alive. The true right-hand man of WHO?" It was one fascinating article Skeeter has put forth. Harry would say it was one of her best works, reading the article, taking his time to sometimes read some of the paragraphs 2 times. Oh yes. Skeeter kept her word. She seems to have come lashing out at the ministry and all but blaming them for incarcerating an innocent man in Azkaban for 12 years. If the heir of a prestigious noble house like House Black can be chucked into Azkaban without a trial, what else is the ministry hiding? How many people have the ministry simply imprisoned inside Azkaban without a trial? Was Sirius Black incarcerated because of Mr. Bartemius Crouch's incompetence, or was there something sinister at play? It is no secret Mr. Crouch's son is a convicted Death Eater. Could Mr. Crouch also be one and took revenge on behalf of you-know-who on the godfather of Harry Potter, the boy who lived? He was having a healthy amount of respect for Rita Skeeter and her cutthroat words. So long as those words were being directed at his enemies, he'd have no problem. The article doesn't end there. It is also possible that Mr. Lucius Malfoy may have played a part in the illegal incarceration of Sirius Black. After all, it is to Mr. Malfoy's advantage the Black family goes extinct without a male heir, as his son will be the next in line to the Black fortune. Sirius Black was also a decorated Auror who fought against you-know-who for the ministry. Could it be that Mr. Malfoy thought he could use the bulk fortune to do his former master's work? While Mr. Malfoy claimed to be under the Imperious Curse, his admission before the Wisingamot was never under the influence of Veritaserum or a magically binding oath. This brings us, the average wizards and witches, to question the legitimacy of these sham trials conducted for the former self-proclaimed imperused Death Eaters. If the ministry is responsible for a grave injustice like imprisoning an innocent man in Azkaban, what else have they done? What other dark secrets are the ministry keeping hidden from the eyes of the average wizards and witches? While Harry was impressed with Rita Skeeter's persistent attacks against the ministry and Lucius Malfoy, another major article on the 3rd page exceeded his expectations. Malfoy Snape Crouch. The Axis of Evil? The conspiracy to assassinate the boy who lived via the Triwizard Tournament. The attack at the World Cup. Is the ministry involved in the cover-up? The greatest cover-up of this century. Death Eaters walking scot-free while heroes languish in prisons. These were the headlines of other articles regarding his performance and selection in the tournament, and Skeeter makes several leaps and conjectures. Basically, she blames Harry's entry into the tournament on Malfoy, Crouch, and Snape. The Ministry is involved in a big conspiracy and good working wizards and witches could all be thrown into prison by the evil Ministry. This was the general tone of her columns. Harry was quite surprised at Skeeter's blatant attack on Malfoy of all people. The last time he spoke she was afraid of Malfoy's influence on the Prophet. But now all of a sudden she was attacking Malfoy head-on. What changed? It can't be solely based on the blackmail material I have over Skeeter. Harry thought with a frown as he read the article greedily. Someone else must have a stake in bringing Malfoy down. But who? Sure, Malfoy must have made enemies throughout the years and riding on the present controversy was surely an advantage for any would-be enemy of Malfoy. It was something worth looking into in his opinion. But that could wait as he had an annoyed bushy-haired friend who was frowning quite heavily expecting a response. As soon as the article was published I suppose, he answered honestly which made Hermione stutter who was no doubt gearing up to face a denial. You kept this from me. Me? Why? Hermione asked and Harry could see she was hurt that he'd keep secrets from her. Hermione, you are a muggle born and this world is filled with racist bigots who hate your existence. If they think you have sensitive information regarding an accused criminal, can you even imagine what they'd do to you? Harry asked. His question drained Hermione's ire in an instant. Professor Dumbledore will do nothing just as he has done nothing in the first year, second year, third year, and this year. Harry finished for her looking at her challengingly to see whether she would argue. You've got to admit, Hermione. Dumbledore's been awfully quiet after Harry's name came out of the goblet, supplied Ron, who for once was speaking sense after a long while. But Harry. This is Dumbledore we are talking about, said Hermione, looking imploringly at both Harry and Ron in disbelief. You've got to admit Dumbledore's been fat lot of good in clearing Sirius's name even with his position in the Wizengamot, said Ron. Exactly. Harry agreed, finding himself pleasantly surprised by Ron who was rather insightful in the matter. The kid was not hopeless it'd seem. Dumbledore is the head of Wizengamot and he also wields enormous influence. You'd think someone like that who is supposed to be a virtuous man would stand up for what's right rather than what's easy. If Harry can manage to do all this with talking to a single reporter, then imagine what Dumbledore could do. I wonder what he's planning. Maybe he is barmy, said Ron despite Hermione's scandalized outcry. Ron. Is the prophet true, Harry? Asked Neville who was so far been quiet and silently observing the conversation. Yes, Neville. There is quite a good story behind the whole fiasco of last year. I'll fill you in on the history class, said Harry. Harry! You can't make plans like that for a class, said Hermione, disapproval written all across her face. Oh come on, Hermione. Binns is crazy. Ron cried. The two began arguing in earnest while Harry and Neville watched on amusedly from the sidelines. A bit of time passed and Harry was sitting in the divination class bored out of his mind. He genuinely wondered why the fuck would any sane person intentionally struggle through this useless piece of subject. He had of course given a written request to McGonagall to have his divination classes cancelled in favor of something more useful like arithmancy. Of course, the deputy headmistress has been less than impressed by the request and merely gave him a crisp "I'll think about it," before shooing him away. This was before the first task. Since then, he has been buttering her up slowly here and there to escape this hell created by the most lunatic person in Hogwarts, and that was saying something. Harry could not stand to breathe the same air as Professor Trelawney. The woman was batshit crazy and focused on teaching a branch of magic that was useless. Hey, Harry. How did you die this time? Asked Seamus Finnegan who was sitting directly behind his seat. A lightning bolt hit me when I was flying on a broom. Harry answered blandly. Trelawney will like it. Say, any clue about that egg of yours? Asked Dean Thomas. You want another screeching banshee on your hands? He asked, quirking his eyebrow. Nope. I'm good, said Dean, blanching at the thought of gracing the sweet music that came out the last time the egg was opened in the common room. What could that mean though? Asked Neville who was sitting beside Harry. Maybe Harry has to brew the mandrake potion, Ron suggested. I don't think that's the one, Ron. They brought dragons for the first task. Surely, they are going to bring some magical creature that has a shrill screaming voice. Seamus reasoned. What is that, dears? Asked Professor Trelawney, approaching their general direction. I was asking Ron whether Pluto is kind on me, Professor, said Seamus, barely holding back a snicker. Well, death is circling you, Mr. Finnegan. But not so much as our dear Mr. Potter, said Trelawney, letting out a dramatic shudder for the effect. It'd have been fun if it wasn't for the fact that Harry hasn't been seeing this stunt for quite a while now. Why the delay then? Wouldn't he get tired of circling around and getting cross-eyed by all the circling he has been doing for a long time? Harry snapped out before he could control himself. Trelawney discarded his snarky tone in favor of dramatically throwing her head back and shaking her head side to side like a mad horse. Oh, but dear. Death is a patient entity. It strikes in the most unexpected of times. Harry scowled while swallowing the urge to snap back at this loon. Instead, he went back to thinking of other more important matters. Like, how to clear Sirius's name or where to go from the present state of his plans. He was waiting for Andromeda Tonks and her progress in the courts before taking a hands-on approach in the matter. There was yet a card to play, but he'd rather not play that card until there was another tangible way of getting Sirius a free man. If divination was bad, the care of magical creatures class left him stumped. On one hand, Hagrid was a friend and a gentle soul. Most of the time. Hagrid's gentle nature took a back seat when it comes to dangerous creatures. For example, the horses of the Bosbaton's carriage were of a different breed than normal horses. They were breathing out fire from the corner of their mouth the last he saw them, and the class was supposed to feed them fire whiskey. Apparently, the French horses love whiskey, and Hagrid took that as an opportunity to teach them how that's done. It didn't help the care of magical creatures class was shared by Gryffindors and Slytherins. Tension was thick between the two houses, especially with everything that was happening. According to Dobby, who had made his personal job to watch Malfoy and the mini Death Eater squad, was having some troubles in the house. Some of the older students in the House of Slytherin became tired of Malfoy's appalling ability to embarrass the whole house at every turn. Their little group has been shunned for the time being and asked to stay the hell away from trouble. Harry didn't know how long that'd last. Malfoy's usual rhetoric was never about his personal power. It was all about his father's influence. Well, Malfoy had learned his lesson and never tried to pick a fight with him after the first task. So, Harry was comfortable with leaving Malfoy out of his mind so long as the blonde never steps into his path ever again. It also helped Snape was under probation as he was undergoing a disciplinary hearing from the Hogwarts Board of Directors. He learned that bit of detail from Neville, whose grandmother was now a member of the board. With Snape on probation, the man also lost his power to award or subtract points from students. Same with detention, and this made Hogwarts a better place as the greasy bat of the dungeons focused on teaching for once instead of being a douchebag. Harry flinched as the scrut he was handling turned its scaly body into a bludgeoning weapon and smashed on his knees. It was by luck he had the presence of mind to cast a hasty protego, else he would have had a broken leg. Easy does it, Harry. Just handle them with a gentle touch, cried Hagrid. Harry stared incredulously at Neville, who shook his head in disbelief while looking at the scruts with unabashed fear. Hagrid, on the other hand, continued on with his explanation to the class. I'm not sure whether they hibernate or not. Hagrid told the students, who were desperately trying to wrestle the scruts into their paddocks. We'll just feed them and keep them in these boxes. There were 5 more scruts left to be locked in their paddocks, and they were causing mayhem all around. They were fighting the students every step of the way, while they were also fighting amongst themselves. In Harry's opinion, the scruts should be allowed to fight amongst themselves. That way, they could all sit back and watch while they tire themselves out. We'll just get them in the boxes nice and easy. We let them sleep for a bit and they will be back to normal, said Hagrid. Define normal. Harry muttered as he finally managed to wrestle a scrut into a box lined with cushy pillows. But the scruts, it transpired, did not sleep, nor did they appreciate being surrounded by a closed container that inhibited their free movement. Soon the blasted creatures were focusing their energy on smashing the boxes to make their escape. Hagrid tried to keep the situation under control, but once again everything dissolved into chaos. The Scroots broke through and began a whole new rampage. Harry could see Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle making a run for Hagrid's cabin. Shaking his head, Harry began to fire away stunning spells that managed to put the creatures down. It took him 3 or 4 spells to put down one Scroot to sleep. Hagrid was not so happy with his method of putting down the Scroots, but there was simply no other way. Somehow, they managed to put the last Scroot into sleep and bound all of them in ropes. When all was said and done, Harry sported several cuts all around his left leg and arms. Others were not faring any better. "Well, we managed to keep the Scroots safe," said Hagrid with a giant smile. "He's gone bonkers," Ron whispered. "I think this is a pre-existing condition, Ron," Harry whispered back. "You are right. Merlin, save us," Ron whispered hoarsely. Merlin might be too afraid to step into these grounds. Before Harry could take his leave to the castle, Hagrid held him back before giving him a note. "It's from Professor Dumbledore," Hagrid explained when Harry looked at him questioningly. Opening the parchment, he read the note. It was an invitation to meet with Professor Dumbledore in his office. Looks like the jig is up. Chapter 14, House Elf Liberation Front. What do you think Dumbledore's going to say? Harry frowned at Ron discreetly. The redhead was being annoying and frankly getting on his nerves. What, with all the chess challenges and inane games from the redhead Weasley, he was frankly getting a headache. He wondered whether he was this annoying in his younger days. Not bloody likely. Besides, who plays chess of all things to pastime? It's an old man's game. Harry thought with a neatly concealed scoff. He was more of a football and volleyball fan. He liked games that demand effort from the body rather than just the mind. Chess was a game for lazy people in his opinion. While a good outlet for the mind, it didn't contribute anything to the benefit of the body. I don't know, Ron. I will know when I actually meet Dumbledore, Harry said patiently for the umpteenth time. Maybe he is going to offer his help with serious situation. Harry ignored that comment in favor of concentrating on the parchment in his hand. Not just any parchment, but a parchment that held written notes made by Voldemort himself. He nicked those notes from the chamber, and he had to say some of the books and notes in the chamber were interesting, to say the least. The parchment in his hand carried several good pointers on occlumency. The mind arts was something Voldemort was more than proficient in even as a Hogwarts student. That was a moot point, as Tom Riddle was someone who made a Horcrux in his Hogwarts years. Occlumency would be something Voldemort learned the first chance he got, and it had seemed the Dark Lord took lessons in the chamber. This was extremely fortunate for Harry, who had limited access to books on the matter. Getting access to the restricted section would be too public, as he did not want Dumbledore to get wind of any of his activities. The only other venue to pursue occlumency was in the Room of Requirement. Unfortunately, Harry could not take out the books from the room. This left him to take notes in the room and then take them out into his room to study at his leisure. The notes from Voldemort, on the other hand, was far more useful, and they held many helpful tips. He had no idea that a perfect occlumens required mastery of their magical aura. Fluctuating magic will always disrupt the construction of occlumency shields to protect the mind from cognitive attacks. That was the good news. The bad news is, magical aura for a young wizard or a witch settles down only on their 16th birthday. Harry could not afford to wait that long for constructing strong barriers around his mind. As it happens, Tom Riddle also came to the same epiphany long ago. The Dark Lord could not let someone else access the secrets in his dark mind. To that effect, Tom Riddle researched a ritual from Slytherin's repository of books in the chamber. It was a simple enough ritual for those who are well versed in runes. Harry would have to learn the art of drawing runes, and most importantly, he would have to collect some special ingredients. The listed ingredients were grounded unicorn horn, the essence of moonshine, and hair from a sphinx. While ingredients could be bought, somehow the issue of drawing the ritual circle remained. It was for this reason he was studying ancient runes. After learning to draw the ritual cycle, he would have to calculate the planetary arrangements. The ritual can't be done on a whim. The position of Sun, Moon, and Jupiter has to be aligned in a certain way to enhance the ritual's effectiveness. And there are only so many days in a year that the arrangements suited for the ritual would appear. Maybe Dumbledore wants to congratulate you. You fancy a round of chess? Asked Ron. And that was Harry's limits of patience. He packed all the parchments and books into his bag before taking his leave from the common room. On his way out of the Gryffindor Tower, he encountered Hermione at the entrance. Harry! Hermione screeched excitedly as she came across him at the entrance as the portrait of the fat lady swung open. The most amazing thing has happened. You've got to see this, please. Before he knew what was happening, he found himself dragged away from the tower all the way to the entrance hall. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, she took a left and Harry realized where she was taking him. Oh, hang on, don't tell me you are dragging me off to see the house elves? Harry groaned as he rubbed his face tiredly. This was the last thing he wanted to happen this day. Of course, I am. Don't you want to see the house elves? Asked Hermione with excitement shining in her eyes. Sure, but what is your plan once you see the house elves? What are you going to say to them? I'll talk to them and inform them how their life could be better if they are free. They must have rights and must be properly paid for their labor, said Hermione. Have you ever thought why they bound themselves in servitude to wizards and witches? Of course they didn't. Wizards must have taken them as slaves, said Hermione. Just because that's how slavery happened in the Muggle world doesn't mean that's how it happened in the wizarding world. Why not? How else could the house elves be turned into slaves? Hermione, you know as well as I do wizards and witches of the past were not that magically strong. Even with the discovery of wand-making helping wizards to channel their magic better, they were decentralized for a long time. Harry said with a sigh. What's that got to do with liberating house elves? Asked Hermione. Do you really think wizards of the past were strong enough to enslave an entire race of magical beings that could wield magic with far more potency? House elves can teleport through wards, they can perform magic that outperforms a wizard, and they don't even use a wand. They never get tired of using magic, and all my research points out that house elves do not face magical depletion. But, that's not relevant, said Hermione with a frown. I want to free them. It is relevant. We must know why they are serving wizards and witches. Why have they not bound themselves to goblins? Surely, the goblins have a lot of work in their minds and house elves are cheap labor. Plus, you already know goblins have a sort of caste system inside them. They literally keep a portion of their kind as slaves. So, why have they not used house elves? Maybe the house elves didn't want to serve the goblins, or maybe wizards forbid house elves from serving the goblins, reasoned Hermione, suddenly intensifying her glare to McGonagall levels. Harry knew that look. It was the look his bushy-haired friend would get when she decided to staunchly defend something. Opinionated teenage girls are the worst. Harry thought in the confines of his mind. Wizards do no such thing. Well, at least that's what I found out in my brief searches of some history books. Wait. You looked into history books? Asked Hermione in surprise. You don't have to be that much surprised. I am interested in seeing house elves getting fair treatment, a good wage for their hard work and dignity. So, of course, I looked into their history as much as I can in a short time. That's good, Harry. But, don't you think you are reading into this all wrong? Dobby is a free elf and nothing has happened to him. Hermione pointed out. Well, Dobby is not free per se, he said somewhat lamely. What? Hermione blinked in surprise. Dobby bound himself to me. Hermione looked horror-struck as if he slapped her. Harry, you! How could you? Hermione screamed. Oh, don't throw out your morals at me. I pay him for his work, said Harry, which somewhat settled Hermione's concerns. How much do you pay him? Asked Hermione, now somewhat calm but still looking at him suspiciously. Ask him yourself. Dobby. With a pop, Dobby teleported in between Hermione and Harry. Harry Potter, sir, called Dobby? Yes, Dobby. You remember Hermione, don't you? Harry knelt beside Dobby and pointed at his bushy-haired friend. Dobby knows Harry Potter's friend. Hermione perked up and smiled at Dobby. It's good to meet you, Dobby. I heard you are working for Harry. Dobby loves working for Harry Potter, sir. Harry Potter, sir, pays Dobby. Dobby gets a galleon a week and 1 day off a month. Dobby squeaked or happily. That's not very much. Hermione shouted indignantly while glaring at Harry, who rolled his eyes. Do you know how much trouble I went through to even force Dobby to take 1 galleon a week and a day off on a month? My first offer was 10 galleons a week and a day off each week. But he wouldn't take the offer. That's another headache for you, Hermione, if you are serious about liberating house elves. You've got to teach them how to negotiate an employment contract, said Harry. Dobby has too much gold, miss, with nothing to spend on. Harry Potter, sir, gave Dobby too much gold to buy hats and clothes for Dobby. Dobby knows not what he will spend his wages on, said Dobby. Harry looked at Hermione pointedly. You see. And Dobby is one of the most reasonable elves. Wait till you deal with the rest of them. They won't even hear you out. That's 'cause they don't know any better. With Dobby's help I can help other house elves to demand payment for their work, said Hermione. Well, good luck on that. I still think we should study more about the house elves before jumping to conclusions. Take Dobby for instance. He still can't speak badly of the Malfoys without punishing himself, said Harry, shrugging helplessly. There is magic involved in their enslavement. And wherever magic is involved, logic has little hold on the situation. Cockroach cluster. The gargoyle that stood guard over the headmaster's office moved aside to show the stairs to Dumbledore's office. Harry climbed the stairs and, as usual, the door swung open before he had a chance to knock. Hello, Harry, said Dumbledore, who was sitting behind his desk petting Fawkes. Come in, please. Harry walked inside and was glad to note Professor McGonagall was also present, just as she promised. The room was filled with portraits of old headmasters of Hogwarts, and many of them were not welcoming, going by their expressions. It was understandable, as last time he may have come across as quite unhinged. Professor McGonagall was standing near the headmaster's desk, wearing a purple cloak and a large black pointy hat. He could not fathom how people can just walk around with the ridiculous hat all the time. He found the pointy hats funny and liked wearing them now and then, but certainly not all the time. We were just discussing some of the arrangements for the coming Christmas week, and of course your unique situations also came up. Now, please take a seat, Harry. You too, Minerva, said Dumbledore before rummaging around the desk. As Harry took a seat adjacent to Professor McGonagall with a muttered thank you, Dumbledore held out a glass bowl full of colorful candy towards them. Lemon drops? No, thanks. Professor McGonagall politely declined, which Harry copied readily when he was offered the same by Dumbledore. Coming to the matter at hand. The last time we spoke you aired many grievances. I believe you are now satisfied some of them have been dealt with, said Dumbledore. Some, not all. Harry emphasized. I didn't declare your innocence in the matter of your selection in the Great Hall, but all other houses have been suitably informed by their head of house in the confines of their common rooms, said Professor McGonagall. Thank you, Professor. Harry said, nodding thankfully to the deputy headmistress before turning his attention to Dumbledore. He had his reservations on that move, but he required McGonagall's cooperation. It was not a good strategy to make enemies across the spectrum. It was now time to change the gear, so to speak. I would also like to apologize to the two of you professors for my earlier outburst. Fuck no, he wasn't apologizing for that. But Dumbledore was a dangerous enemy to have. It was better to play ball for the time being and take what concession he can without sacrificing too much in this game of wits. That's good to hear, Harry, although you raised some valid concerns. If you'd have been patient, I'd have told you I was already working several members of the Wizengamot to get Sirius a trial, said Dumbledore. A blatant lie, Harry thought, but he just nodded. Now, what you have done with Rita Skeeter is extraordinary. It has pushed on my own efforts, and the Wizengamot and Sirius will most likely get a trial next month at the earliest. Truly, Albus? Asked Professor McGonagall. Yes, Minerva. It seems young Harry's efforts seem to have swayed many opinions in the Wizengamot, said Dumbledore with his eyes twinkling away. I wonder why Skeeter of all people is taking up this story. It is not her style to do so, said Professor McGonagall, looking quite surprised. I think there are quite a few people who'd love to see Lucius never touch the Black Fortune, said Dumbledore before eyeing Harry, who maintained a poker face lest the man finds out his working relationship with Skeeter. Now, there are some issues regarding Professor Snape. You accused Professor Snape of using legilimency, said Dumbledore, and he framed the question in a way that came off as accusing Harry of some wrongdoing. I have and I stand by my accusations, said Harry firmly. I'd ask where you came by this branch of magic? And I'd ask what relevance does that have in this matter? I felt a clear mental intrusion from Professor Snape, and I can swear on my magic, or you can use Veritaserum to see whether I'm speaking the truth. There is no need for such measures, Harry. We believe you and Professor Snape has been reprimanded for his behavior. I personally give you my word he won't conduct himself poorly, said Dumbledore. Harry could now glean a bit of Dumbledore's character. The man was what he'd like to call a negotiator. He used that term to pick out people who negotiated instead of having a normal conversation. Mostly this style of conversation was used by those with political and business acumen. While you are at it, I'd also appreciate Professor Snape no longer bullies me in the classroom. If he reverts back to his old ways, I'll be forced to find ways to oust that man from this school, or any school for that matter. I won't tolerate that man if he continues to derogate me and my father's name. If he had problems with my father, he should have resolved that with my father when he was alive. I suggest Professor Snape not take his issues against a 14-year-old, especially when I'm paying him to educate me. While Harry was open to working with Dumbledore for the time being, he was not going to bend over backwards for the old coot or his Death Eater dog. As I said, Professor Snape is well aware of what he did wrong and he will behave professionally, assured Dumbledore. Thank you, sir. Good. Now, there is another matter I wish to discuss with you, Harry. Amelia Bones, the head of DMLE, would like to have a word with you and collect information regarding the events that transpired last year. Would it be okay if I arrange a meeting the day before the Yule Ball? Asked Dumbledore, making Har re-blink olishly. Oh, fuck. I've got to dance, don't I? Harry thought even as he nodded dumbly. Chapter 15, A Date. He had nearly forgotten about the Yule Ball, and now he was faced with the greatest challenges of all. He needed to find a date for the Yule Ball, plus there was the interrogation by Madame Bones to look forward to before the whole thing. Harry was not doubtful of his ability to pick up women, but that's part of the problem. He dated women, not teenage girls. While there was not a great age gap, it still felt odd for someone who was a 25-year-old to date a 14-year-old girl. Thinking about it made him realize there was indeed a great age gap. He knew the ball was not required to have a permanent date, but he felt a mental disconnect with the prospect of what was expected of him. He could go for older girls, but the chances of embarrassing himself were also quite high. After all, older girls would feel embarrassed to go with a young boy, and unfortunately for him, biologically he is a young boy. There was nothing he could do to change that unless he could perform some mass hypnosis. This left him to find one of the most mature girls in his year, and that's how he found himself in the library. Hermione is the most mature girl he met in his year. Comparatively, she is far more mature than many of the older girls as well. Not to mention, he could freely admit to her that he was asking her out as a friend. The other girls, he feared, would either be distraught or totally ignore his heartfelt plea. The last thing he wanted on his plate was an emotionally volatile teenage girl whose feelings he hurt unwittingly. Harry looked around the many tables in the library until finally, he found Hermione at a corner with a slew of books. "Hey, Hermione." Harry greeted as he plopped on the seat opposite Hermione. "Hey, Harry. I looked for you in the common room, but you were not there." "Ah. I got a note from Professor Vector asking for me." "What for?" "I told you about my plan to switch to arithmancy from divination. Professor Vector has agreed to have me over provided I pass a test she'd hold for me after 10 days of special classes," said Harry. "You should have abandoned divination in the 3rd year," said Hermione, letting out a sniff. "Life is full of bad choices, Hermione. Besides, I listened to Ron instead of thinking what's good for me." Harry shrugged helplessly. "I have some notes if you want to familiarize yourself with the subject." Hermione offered. But, isn't that third-year material? How come you have it now? Never mind. I should have expected that from you, Hermione, said Harry with a shake of his head. But, yes. It will be immensely helpful if you share your notes. I'll give them tonight then, said Hermione before she began scribbling down on her book. Harry was about to ask her out to the ball when he noticed a gaggle of girls gathering at a nearby bookshelf. They were whispering and giggling, making Harry frown. Madame Pants looked none too pleased with the girls. Harry followed the line of sight of the girls and found Crumb not too far away. In fact, Crumb was looking his way, or more exactly in Hermione's way. Oh. Crumb had a thing for Hermione, and Harry became hesitant to go through with his decision to ask Hermione out. Crumb certainly liked Hermione by the looks he was throwing Hermione's way, and he doubted Hermione was that ignorant as she played it out. If the one thing he learned about women all these years was that they never missed the details. They have a keen sense of taking in all the details, some of which men stupendously ignores. So, he was not so sure whether Hermione was blind to Crumb's intentions, and he suspected she chose a wait-and-see approach. Harry once again looked at Crumb, who was hanging behind the bookshelf silently staring at Hermione now and then. He then looked at the gathering fangirls of Crumb and took pity on the guy. He could understand Crumb in a sense. The guy wanted some peace and quiet, which Hermione seems to give him, and that made him all the more attracted to her. It didn't help the ball was announced publicly yesterday and Crumb's fans were lining up to ask the guy out. "I'll be back in a moment," said Harry as he stood up and approached Crumb. Seeing Harry approaching, Crumb quickly went back to the pretend reading the guy was engaging. "You don't have to pretend to read to stare longingly at Hermione. You can just ask her out, you know," Harry said in a whisper as he slid in opposite Crumb. Crumb looked at Harry with wide eyes and immediately went into denial, which was a classic reaction one could expect. "I don't know what you are talking about," said Victor, avoiding Harry's eyes. Harry let out an amused snort. "Your red cheeks say otherwise. Oh, look, your ears are also turning red. You should ask her out instead of stalking her all day." "I don't stalk," said Crumb, his whole face now turning red while struggling with his heavily accented English. "You don't say?" Harry eyed Crumb with an amused smirk. "You want me to introduce you to Hermione?" He could see Crumb's eyes widen in surprise. Crumb looked undecided for a moment as he looked at Harry curiously and then at Hermione before finally succumbing. "I'd appreciate it." Harry smiled before getting up from the seat, asking Crumb to follow. He walked towards Hermione's table with Crumb closely following him. "Hermione." Harry had his suspicions confirmed when Hermione looked up at the two of them with uncharacteristic shyness. "This is Victor Crumb, and he'd like to discuss an important matter with you. You don't mind, do you?" Harry asked, and before Hermione could respond he pushed Crumb into the seat opposite Hermione. "Glad to know you are okay. Have a good time, both of you." With that, Harry made his exit from the library. Once outside, he smiled at his awesome matchmaking powers. Not so amazing when Crumb was already interested in Hermione, but he'd certainly expedited the process. It was better this way. Hermione would certainly have a better time with Crumb than if she went with him. Besides, things could get awkward in the Gryffindor common room if he was going out with Hermione. It was better if he found someone outside the Gryffindor house. Harry thought as he walked outside the castle towards the Black Lake. He waved his wand around, covering his body with warming charms. The sleet and winds of December were far too intense to take on without the comfort of warming charms. Sitting down on a small slab of stone, he relaxed a bit. Even the common room of Gryffindor Tower was now a hostile environment. Not a conversation would go by without discussing who asked who out, who turned down dates, the most embarrassing moments in asking out a girl to the ball, and so on. It felt like he was living in a soap opera skit where all the characters are discussing the most inane things they could think of for the sake of drama. "Bloody immature teenagers," he uttered before a flutter of wings caught his attention. Hedwig swooped in with a letter clutched in her talons. The letter fell into his lap while Hedwig perched herself on his shoulder. "Good girl, Hedwig," Harry said, petting his trusted owl. Hedwig let out a soft hoot and nipped at his fingers before taking flight to the sky. Most probably she was going back to the Ollery and pick fights with other owls. Harry shook his head before concentrating on the letter at hand. It was from Andromeda Tonks. Dear Mr. Potter, I am happy to say our writ petition in the ICW court has been taken into due consideration and the court has asked for an explanation from the British Ministry before December 16. While this is a standard procedure, the political pressure the ICW court will undoubtedly exercise on the British Ministry is to our advantage. To that effect, I am glad to inform you that the British Ministry has agreed to suspend the Dementor Kiss on sight order against Sirius Black till he is judged under the oversight of a Wisengamot trial. The trial date has not been clarified, but I'm told the session will be held at the earliest of January. Once the date is fixed, I shall inform you at the earliest time possible. However, do keep in mind that Mr. Black remains a wanted person by the British Ministry. If he is caught by the Aurors, he will be moved to Azkaban. I strongly advise he remain in hiding wherever he is hiding until the trial date. I'm in the process of moving the DMLE to halt all criminal proceedings against Mr. Black, but the ministry has been dragging the proceedings. I fear they are trying to stonewall the progress of the case and hoping to capture Mr. Black before the trial date. On another unrelated note, your suspicions regarding a benefactor behind the Daily Prophet article is true. There is an internal battle waging inside the Prophet between two shareholders. On reading further, Harry found out the name of the individual who was indirectly helping him. A total unknown in some sense, but there was a path he could make contact with the individual right here in Hogwarts. Harry sat there thinking for a moment before he came to a decision. He burned the letter and cast the Point Me spell. The wand spun around in his hand before pointing in a direction. XXXXXXXX. She stared confusedly at the large doors of an abandoned classroom. She was just about to return the charms textbook she had borrowed from the library. Just as she climbed the stairs from the dungeons to the first floor, she had an epiphany to open the doors to this classroom. She wondered why she needed to open the door. "Hello, Daphne." She nearly screamed, but her wand was out and whirled around to face whoever it was, only to falter at the visage of the resident golden boy of Gryffindor. "You? Why are you here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady and her face icy neutral. She employed the teaching of her father and began suppressing emotions. Harry Potter was dangerous, far too dangerous than she had ever thought. As someone who grew up hearing the story of Potter's miraculous survival of the killing curse and the apparent destruction of the Dark Lord, Daphne was curious about Harry Potter. But all that curiosity came crashing down in the first year when she saw an immature and weak boy joining the House of Gryffindor. When the boy befriended a lazy slob like Ronald Weasley, her opinion of the supposed savior of the wizarding world came further down. In the second year, Potter surprised her with his ability to speak the noble tongue of serpents. While the ignorant fools of the wizarding world would deride the serpent tongue as dark magic, she knew better. Parseltongue was the epitome of healing magic, something that her family has been interested in for some time. The revelation that Potter could speak the serpent tongue was a gut punch to her father, who has been looking for a sane speaker in the world. The one that everyone knew was an insane wizard bent on world domination. The other speakers have isolated themselves in the remotest islands near the Indian subcontinent doing Merlin knows what. Despite Potter's apparent ability to use Parseltongue, she observed how much of an ignorant buffoon the boy was. Not to mention, Dumbledore and all the self-proclaimed light wizards held a monopoly on Potter. At least, that's what she thought, and never has she been so mortified and embarrassed to have judged someone wrong. Cognitive equilibrium, the first sign of a budding accoutrement. Impressive, Potter said with an impressed look. Daphne blanched in fear as she struggled to keep her mind blank. Could Potter read her mind? No, I can't, Potter said, making her eyes widen. Wah! What do you want? She stuttered out. Potter is a leglaments? A few minutes of your time for a one-on-one chat. You are not afraid, are you? No, I'm not afraid. What do you want to talk about? She asked, regaining her composure as she readily took hold of her mind. Please open the door and let's talk. Daphne eyed the door behind her and then looked at Potter, who stood idle. She could have decided to not entertain Potter's request, but she was curious. She pushed the door open and entered, followed by Potter, who walked around her and sat on a desk. Daphne meanwhile stayed by the door lest this was a trap of some kind. "I'm told from a reliable source that your father has been trying his hardest to oust a branded slave from the Prophet," said Potter. Daphne frowned at that and was quite surprised that Potter knew what was going on inside the Daily Prophet. While her father certainly didn't share much detail, the fact that the Prophet suddenly turned on Mr. Malfoy can only mean her father was involved. It was not a great leap for her to conclude this was the case. Although, she wondered whether Potter was speaking of Lucius Malfoy. "I don't know what you are talking about," said Daphne. "A lie," Potter observed, much to her chagrin. "You should work on your occlumency a bit more. Either way, just be a dear and pass on my heartfelt thanks to your father. An enemy of my enemy is my friend. Should he desire some small aid in his endeavor to oust the ferret's father, feel free to contact me." Daphne watched with a frown as Potter decided to walk out of the classroom. This was what Potter had to say. She had expected some trouble when Harry Potter of all people asked to have a word with her in an abandoned classroom of all places. "Wait. You want me to pass along a message of thanks and an offer of aid to my father?" asked Daphne, while her mind came up with an idea to use the situation. "Yes. I shall do this for you, but what will you give me in return?" Daphne asked, and she was pleasantly surprised Potter was not gaping like an idiot. Instead, Potter was frowning and looking at her far too closely for her liking. "You want something for passing on a message to your father?" "Yes. If you haven't took notice, I'm my own person and not your personal owl." Daphne snarked. "I did notice that. You look nothing like Hedwig. So, what do you want?" asked Potter with his arms folded over his chest. She hadn't thought Potter would agree to her demand, but now that he agreed, she was a bit stumped on what she should ask. She hadn't exactly planned for any of this to happen, but she certainly would like to know more about the enigma that was turning out to be Harry Potter. "I require a date to the Yule Ball and you are going to take me." Daphne was satisfied with the shocked and confused look gracing Potter's face. "You do realize what you are asking, right?" "What?" "Afraid of the reaction you will garner from your house?" she asked with a smirk. "I could care less what anyone thinks of who I'm taking to the ball." "Are you sure you can take the backlash from your house?" "You don't know anything about me, Potter, nor do you know everything about Slytherin House. I can handle myself. The only question is, will you be my date to the Yule Ball?" Daphne asked with her hands on her hips. Daphne felt the green eyes of Potter looking at her, searching for a moment before he agreed, to her surprise. She watched as Potter walked away from the classroom, and once she was sure the Gryffindor seeker was far away, she smiled. If Potter hadn't cornered her today, she wouldn't have bothered to ask him out for the ball. She would have waited and watched Potter's progress and made contact with him at the end of the year. The fact that he knew of the curse afflicting her family was troubling. Her grandfather had studied extensively about the Greengrass curse, and according to him, Parseltongue was the last hope for their family. There was another way to escape the curse, but her father considered that an impossible task. Although, she wondered how Potter could have known of the Greengrass curse. It was not something that was widely known. It was one more reason for her to be curious about Harry Potter. XXXXXX. Mate, you won't believe the Hogwarts rumor mill is saying about you. Can't believe some of the lies they cook up, said Ron as the redhead plopped himself beside Harry, who was reading his Transfiguration book. Harry grunted but otherwise remained silent. "What kind of rumors?" asked Hermione. "Of all the things they could have come up with." Ron trailed off with a snicker. "Apparently, Harry is taking Greengrass to the Yule Ball." Ron proceeded to laugh like a hyena in the common room, garnering glares from many other inhabitants. As usual, Ron remained ignorant of the reactions he was gathering with his raucous personality. "What's wrong with Harry taking Greengrass to the ball?" "She is in my runes class and we get along well," said Hermione. Ron sputtered and looked at Hermione as if she grew a second head. "Greengrass is a slimy Slytherin. Get along well, she says." "There are no good Slytherins, Hermine." "Everyone knows that," said Ron. "Oh, don't be daft, Ron. Look at Pettigrew. He was a Gryffindor and he became a Death Eater. If a Gryffindor can become a Death Eater, then a Slytherin can become a respectable human being, said Hermione with a scowl of disapproval directed at Ron. I can't believe you are saying this. Harry, she's gone bonkers, said Ron. It's true, said Harry as he turned a page of his book without looking up. What? Harry! Hermione exclaimed, looking indignantly at Harry for taking Ron's side. See? Even Harry agrees. Slytherins are. I'm taking Daphne Greengrass to the Yule Ball. Harry talked over Ron's gloating. Ron paused and looked at Harry with his jaws wide open in shock. What? How? He shrieked. The common room by this point had gone deathly silent. Greengrass asked me out today. She was the first one who asked and I had no reason to say no. So, I said yes and we will be going to the Yule Ball together, said Harry, standing up from his seat before collecting his books and parchments. I'm turning in for the night. Good night, Hermione. Good night, Ron. The entire common room watched silently as Harry made his way into the dorms. He was joking, right? Right, asked Ron. Unfortunately, no one had an answer. Hermione let out a scoff before she too retreated to her dorm, leaving a heavily confused Ron in the common room. Chapter 16, House Elf Liberation Front 2. Daphne. A familiar voice made her look up from her runes textbook. She cocked an eyebrow inquiringly at her friend Tracy Davis. Saying Tracy was just a friend would be a disservice. They were more than just friends. They were best of friends, sisters even, she'd say. They were born to their respective mothers on the same day and Tracy has Greengrass blood from her father's side. They shared a common birthday and pretty much shared everything from their childhood. Is the rumor true? Asked Tracy with wide eyes. What rumor? The one that claims you are going out with Harry Potter to the Yule Ball. Oh, that. That's true. Daphne said, waving away as if that was a silly matter. It's true. How did you do it? Asked Tracy excitedly. If there is one thing Daphne could say about her friend is that Tracy acted like an excitable little fairy most of the time. It was a stark contrast to how Daphne would express herself. I negotiated. That brought Tracy from her heightened state of excitement. You did what? Tracy asked her aghast. What did you expect? That my heart would flutter because Potter flashed his green eyes at me. Well, I hoped something like that to happen. You were obsessed with Potter after all. Tracy pointed out with her smile returning in full force. Then you don't know me as well as you might think, said Daphne, slipping into her bed, drawing the curtains around her bed in the process. Now, that's rude. Give me more details. Tracy hounded her as she rudely slipped into her bed. There are no details. I asked him to accompany me for the ball and he agreed, said Daphne, struggling off Tracy's attempts to draw her into an embarrassing conversation. Unfortunately, that didn't seem possible. Rather than being discouraged, Tracy let out an excited squeal and proceeded to tackle the runes book out of her hands. You asked Harry Potter out. You asked. Tracy became far more incorrigible and began grappling with Daphne in her excitement. I knew you were a hopeless romantic in your heart, Daphne. It's no wonder you love those Muggle novels. Shut up. Daphne snarled as she pushed Tracy away before grabbing her pillow, hiding her head underneath. Ha! Don't bother with that, Daphne. I can see your cheeks are as red as a tomato. Go away. Go bother Zabini. Daphne mumbled. Blaze is no fun. He is too stoic sometimes, said Tracy as she pulled back her limbs from Daphne. A frown settled on her face. In all seriousness though, Malfoy is going to be unbearable. Since when have we ever feared what that peacock would do? Asked Daphne as she moved the pillow down to quirk her eyebrow at Tracy. Only a fool would fear Malfoy, but he can be a nuisance. When he was focused on Potter, we had less of a headache from that moron. Tracy pouted, thinking of the constant moaning and bitching Malfoy performed in the Slytherin common room as of late. I like the way Potter dealt with him and Snape. It was Daphne searched for the right word. Marvelous? Tracy supplied. No. It was precise. Potter went straight for the jugular. He knew there was no point in complaining endlessly with McGonagall or Dumbledore. He used his fame as a weapon and struck all his enemies down in a single strike. It was art. Daphne said, reminiscing the days after Potter retaliated. It was indeed an art. An art of wielding power and channeling it with precision. She knew hardly anyone in Hogwarts that think and act like Potter. Potter had constructed an entire persona and tricked the whole Hogwarts populace to think he was an easily riled Gryffindor. When in truth, Potter was a dangerous and vindictive person. Potter had outmaneuvered and uprooted the entire Slytherin house on a whim. When Potter was done with his handiwork, only one seventh-year prefect remained standing who had the sense to not wear the Potter Stinks badges. Even Daphne had donned the badge to get Malfoy out of her hair. And for that reason she got all her quills painted pink on a morning. She didn't know how Potter did that, but she was sure it was a retaliation from Potter. Likewise, many of the Slytherins encountered some form of retaliation. Those that reported these attacks to Snape never got around to prove that it was Potter. Potter's hands were clean and somehow the Weasley twins were also not involved. She shuddered to think how Potter had reached into her dorms to do as he wished. She realized Potter was far more dangerous than he looked at that moment. For Merlin's sake, Malfoy broke his wand twice this year. Seriously, who breaks their wands? That's unheard of, which brings up the fact that Potter is a highly vindictive person who held himself back all these years for some reason. She wondered why he played the scared antisocial weakling persona for 3 years. It was one of the mysteries surrounding Potter. With Potter's knowledge of mind arts, it should not be a surprise that he pulled off such a trick. But she didn't know Potter was proficient in mind arts. Now that she thought of it, Potter must have used the Confundus charm to corner her near the abandoned classroom. So, now comes the most important discussion regarding the Yule Ball, said Tracy, who was once again thrumming with excitement. Daphne merely quirked an eyebrow at her friend. Dresses. Tracy squealed and then began to air off suggestion after suggestion, making Daphne sigh and go under the pillowcase to hide from her eccentric friend. XXXXX. Ha 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 ha, oh Harry, you are truly making me proud. Taking a green grass to the Yule Ball. Harry shook his head as Sirius began to laugh again like a hyena. Why is taking a green grass to the ball that much of an issue? I get that she is in Slytherin, but I know a couple of Gryffindors with Slytherin partners as a date. Sirius managed to stop his laughter. Harry, the Greengrass family are the purest of purists. They won't involve themselves with half-bloods or anyone they consider to be impure. While they have never fallen so low as to join the Death Eaters, they are blood purists. I think you might be looking this the wrong way. Daphne is just a 14-year-old girl. Surely, you don't think she is a bigot just because she is born into the Greengrass family? Obviously, she is not one, seeing as she asked you out. I just can't reconcile with the fact that Damian Greengrass' daughter has asked James' son for a date, said Sirius, before proceeding to crack up once again. Why? Did you know the guy? Harry asked with a frown. Know him? Sirius asked incredulously before letting out a huff. He was one right prick to us. He was a year above us, and when he became a prefect the guy had it for us. Let me guess. You pranked him and embarrassed him, which made an enemy out of him. Harry asked blandly. Well, that's about right. Sirius admitted lamely. But, the guy never let that pass. We weren't even pranking the fellow. He just fell into the trap prawns set up for Snivellis. I see. Harry shook his head and wondered how many potential enemies he would have just because he was related to the infamous Marauders. Now, enough about that. I want to know something else about the Potters, said Harry, making Sirius raise an eyebrow. What do you want to know? Sirius asked, sitting you in interest. I want to know everything that you know. Like what happened to my grandparents, are there any Potters left, do I have any relatives in the wizarding world, and most importantly, where is my house? Sirius took taken back before letting out a sigh. You really don't know anything about your family? Duh. Dumbledore made sure he has an ignorant pawn for his games. Well, I don't intend to be his pawn any longer. I mean, he had you locked up in Azkaban to have control over me. Harry took the lack of reaction from Sirius as a credit to his efforts to erode Sirius' remaining loyalty towards the old coot. It was no difficult task either, as all he had to do was reinforce the notion that Dumbledore could have easily given him a trial at any point in time if he really wanted to. He shook those thoughts away and listened keenly as Sirius explained the history of Potters and all the details that he'd need for the time being. When Harry came out of the chamber, he was a bit disappointed with what he found out. Although, he should have expected as much, as Sirius was not exactly the type of person interested in his own history, much less the history of Potters. Sirius only knew of the recent generation of Potters. He knew Harry's grandparents and his parents. Outside that, he knew scarcely little about the Potters. At least, Sirius knew far more than he did, and what little Sirius knew was somewhat useful. He hoped that there was a family manor or something that'd be of aid to him. Unfortunately, Voldemort had seen to the destruction of Potter's family home in the last war. This means there are no portraits of old Potters to give him any sort of guidance, nor was there any home he could move into this coming summer. It also means he could say goodbye to some obscure piece of magic that'd help him in dealing with Voldemort. Harry had already checked the family vault of Potters with Dobby's aid for any secret magical knowledge. Outside of gold, silver, jewelry, and some furniture, there was nothing in the Gringotts vault. Then again, it has to be kept in mind that wizards are fiercely protective of their style of magic, and they refuse to share that with the goblins. So, the last place a self-respecting wizard would store their hard-earned knowledge of magic will be in Gringotts. In the end, he was left with Hogwarts' library and Slytherin's book collection to combat Voldemort. In a sense, he was not in a better position, but he doubted the Potters held any secret weapon that he could use against Voldemort. He had so far not found an ounce of information about Horcruxes in Hogwarts. Even the Room of Requirement didn't provide him much except for a vague explanation of what they are. What Harry wanted to know was a sure way to kill Voldemort. The present state of Voldemort presented him with a perfect opportunity to kill the guy once and for all. Hunting down the Horcruxes before the third task would be impossible. So, a sure way of killing Voldemort or even binding the maniac spirit would have been an ideal solution. His only hope now remained in Slytherin's collection of books and scrolls. That's why he decided to let Sirius in on the secret library of Slytherin and charged him with translating the whole thing. A job Sirius was more than glad to take up, as Sirius was getting bored out of his mind by doing nothing inside the chamber. Sirius had his concerns regarding the shady magic Slytherin's library held, though. Harry had to convince his godfather that Slytherin's library could be the key to unlock secrets surrounding Voldemort's apparent immortality. It took quite a bit of arguing to convince Sirius that this was the only way to kill Voldemort for good instead of waiting indefinitely for a miracle to happen. He had some plans for swimming in the Room of Requirement and check the egg whether it held the same clue that he was familiar with from the books. But he decided to postpone the issue altogether and went straight for Gryffindor Common Room. "Fairy Wings," he said to the fat lady, "the password to enter the common room." "Yes, indeed, dear," the fat lady smiled, straightening herself as she swung open to admit him. Entering the common room, he saw Ron and Hermione in the middle of a fierce argument. "What's up with them?" Harry asked Neville, who was a bystander to the crazed argument that was going on. Instead of Neville, it was Ginny who answered his query. "Oh, it was initially about those flyers Hermione was distributing to everyone." "Now, it's anything and everything," said Ginny. It looked like she was about to say something, but then decided to just give him a leaflet. Looking curiously at the leaflet, Harry hummed as he read through the lines. Its heading itself gave him all the information he needed to know anyway. House Elf Liberation Front. Slavery is morally wrong and reprehensible. To subject another sentient being to work for your benefit without compensating the being, whether it be a wizard, witch, muggle, or a sentient magical creature, is equal to using the imperious curse. The house elves cook our food, clean our dishes, and wash our clothes in Hogwarts. I believe these poor creatures must be given pay for the volume of work they do and must be treated with dignity. Some of these creatures are treated quite horribly by their masters. If you think as I do, then join the House Elf Liberation Front, a group of like-minded individuals that work to ensure fair treatment and wages for house elves. All things considered, this is not a bad idea. Her first idea was to force the house elves to free themselves, said Harry as he reread the leaflet. What's Ron's problem? Don't know. Harry, do you have time for helping me with the summoning charm? Asked Neville. Sure. Let's find a peaceful corner, said Harry, looking at Ron and Hermione, who were arguing away. I don't think even Merlin can perform magic with those two around. Chapter 17, The Egg P1. Genus Mutatio. Harry tapped his wand on the guinea fowl before him after giving a sharp quarter-clockwise spin. The fowl let out a shiver before changing into a guinea pig right before his eyes. The pig looked at him and let out a cute oink. He patted the pig on its head. Don't worry. You will be back to your original body in a jiffy. Potter, stop petting the pig and bring it here if you want your work graded. McGonagall said sharply from behind her desk. There was a smarter of chuckles in the classroom, but Harry paid it no mind. In his defense, the pig he transfigured was too cute. Casting the levitation charm, he moved the pig towards Professor McGonagall's table. The Transfiguration professor took a good look at the pig and scribbled a grade onto her notepad. Off you go, Potter. Do remember to copy down the homework question from the board, said McGonagall before chucking the pig into a gilded cage after shrinking it in size. Returning to his place at the front row, he took out a small book from his backpack before scribbling down the homework question on the blackboard. The advantage of sitting on the front row was that he was far away from Ron Weasley, who never knew when to shut his big mouth. Even now he could hear Ron murmuring about possible Yule Ball dates with Neville at the back seat. Mr. Weasley! Professor McGonagall thundered, and she began berating Ron for his consistent ability to disturb her class. As McGonagall was laying into Ron with everything she had, Harry eyed his partner. He eyed Hermione, who was halfway through the homework question in the class itself. She was not the only one, as he could see several Ravenclaws like Terry Boot and Anthony Goldstein doing the same. Harry shrugged as he decided to do some advanced reading of Transfiguration text with 15 minutes on the clock. Pleasing McGonagall had its perks, as he found out with being allowed to drop divination in favor of taking on arithmancy. Now, he aimed to drop Muggle studies in favor of ancient runes. McGonagall had nearly chewed him out on asking that, as she had already helped him drop divination. In his defense, he learned of the ritual to stabilize his magical aura far later, else he would have asked for Muggle studies to be dropped as well. Despite her ire, McGonagall did speak with Professor Babbling and managed to arrange a meeting on his behalf. It fell to Harry to convince Professor Babbling that he can cover a whole 1.5 years' worth of material in a short amount of time to be of any good when the OWLs came along next year. Harry's stomach growled, signaling he was dying to have some food to sate his needy stomach. He was burning through calories by keeping his exercise regimen. Now that he had recovered somewhat from years of malnutrition thanks to Madame Pomfrey's advice, he was back to train his body to an acceptable standard. To that end, he has been increasing his physical training. Now that his body could take some strain, he was slowly transitioning into some weight training. Nothing major, as he was still growing, but mostly giving some training to his legs for quick movement. A few more minutes later the bell rang and he was out of the class like a speeding bullet. He speedwalked all the way to the Great Hall to have his lunch way before anyone else. At least, he thought he was going to be the first one in, only to come face to face with a half-filled Great Hall. On the Gryffindor table alone there was the 5th year and 7th year students. The only other table that was packed with students was the Hufflepuff table. Seeing the steamy spread on the table, he skipped over to the Gryffindor table and began to fill up his plate earnestly. He picked up 2 slices of bacon, a cup of beef, a chicken leg, some bread, and some tomato sauce. When the first slice of bacon slipped into his mouth, he hummed appreciatively at the spices before watering it down with a bit of water. Maybe it was because he was hungry as hell. The food tasted heavenly, which was already pretty much divine to start with, as Hogwarts food was the best. "Where are the others?" asked Katie Bell, whom he had not at all noticed in his rush to stuff food into his needy stomach. Swallowing down another piece of bacon, he turned to Katie. "I was starving and I made a run for it. They must be catching up sometime soon." Are you sure our brother didn't infect you with anything, Harry? Asked George, wriggling his eyebrows. Yeah. Only our dear little Ronikins would make a run for food, supplied Fred with a grin. I'm a growing boy. I need my food to stay healthy and strong. Oh yeah. That you do, oh great champion of champions. George performed a fake bow. Oh, shut up. I've had transfiguration all morning and McGonagall didn't let us so much as twitch in her class. I'm hungry enough I might just swallow an elephant whole, said Harry before diving into his food, giving no heed to the smatter of chuckles the twins and Katie let out. Ever so slowly, the hall began to fill in and he was joined by Hermione along with his other yearmates. Why did you run away? Asked Hermione, once she sat down next to Harry. I was starving. Some of us do have an appetite for food rather than studying, Hermione, said Ron as he too plopped down opposite Hermione and began piling his plate with food from the table. I know. But I also know some who have an appetite for just food alone. Hermione fired back as she cut carefully into the bacon on her plate. Fred and George laughed while Ron turned beet red. As usual, this was more than enough to spark a shouting match between Hermione and Ron. Harry focused on his lunch and quickly finished it before he carefully stepped out of the Gryffindor table. The meeting with Professor Babbling was arranged just after the lunch break and he didn't want to appear tardy to the professor. But, just before he could extract himself, he came face to face with a fifth-year Hufflepuff girl. Hi, Harry. The girl, whom Harry struggled to put a name to the face, smiled shyly and fluttered her eyes at him. Hello, he greeted back, struggling to find the name. I came to ask whether you'd like to go to the ball with me, Harry, the girl asked as she tucked her curly brown hair behind her left ear. Oh. I'm sorry. I'm already going with someone else. Oh, okay then. Are you sure? I am sure. Have a good day, Harry. Have a good day yourself. After the Hufflepuff girl left, he shouldered his backpack only to be stopped by Ron's comment. You said no to a Hufflepuff in favor of going with a Slytherin. Yes. And the next time you think you have a say in my personal affairs, think again before opening that idiotic mouth of yours. Who I go with or not go with to the ball is my business. Keep your nose out of it if you know what's good for you. Harry said sharply. After giving the redhead nuisance a glare, he was out of the hall with hasty long strides. It was only a few days back he was thinking Ron might not be much of a moron. Harry was already regretting to make that assumption. Standing before the oak doors to Professor Babbling's quarters, he knocked twice and waited patiently. Before today, Harry had no contact with the illustrious professor of ancient runes. The same could be said of Septima Vector, who for all intents and purposes looked like a model more so than a professor. McGonagall looked like a professor, not Septima Vector. The arithmancy professor was far younger than any of Hogwarts' professors he had ever encountered. From his minor inquiries, he learned Professor Vector was 2 years senior of Bill Weasley, which put her in the age bracket of 20 to 25. He also had it on good authority that Professor Vector was a Gryffindor. While the professor has a reputation for being overly strict, he did not find that to be true in his admittedly few interactions. She also happened to be a half-blood. Bathsheba Babbling, on the other hand, was a complete mystery. The only things he knew about her are she is a pureblood and she teaches ancient runes. Other than that, Professor Babbling remained a mystery, which sort of surprised him. Either she has the most unimpressive personality or she has somehow mastered anonymity. Come in. A soft voice carried over to his ears from the room. Harry pushed open the door and he stepped in only to feel a slight shock pass through his body. That's interesting, observed Professor Babbling, who was sitting behind her desk peering at him from behind her thick goggles. She was wearing a black sleeveless jacket over a green sweater. Her blonde hair was neatly pulled back and a green hat on her head. Pardon, he shook away the feeling and looked curiously at the professor. You stepped over a mild detection ward and your reaction intrigues me. Not many have the affinity to sense subtle magic weaved around using runes. It is a rare talent. Oh. Harry looked at the door where he could make out a few runic scripts. If you say so, Professor. Take a seat, Mr. Potter. I suppose you want to get a straight answer whether or not you will be allowed to take my classes instead of Muggle studies. That would be appreciated, Professor. Harry said, taking the offered seat with a nod of appreciation. In that case, I don't think it is functional to have a student join my classes after an entire year has passed. Runes are complex as they are an entirely different language. You need to learn the basics to even hope to comprehend what I am teaching this year. The OWLs will be phenomenally harder, said Professor babbling. But... He was interrupted by a raised hand from the professor. That doesn't mean it is impossible for you to catch up. Nothing is impossible, Mr. Potter, so long as we give our best effort. Now, I don't know much about your character to judge whether you can pursue my subject with utter dedication and hard work. So, I'll assign you a tutor who'll aid you in studying the subject at her leisure. If you impress your tutor enough with your work, I'll give you a separate test this year that'll enable you to sit for the OWLs. Is this acceptable? Harry took a minute to go over the offer. I agree, Professor. In the meantime, am I allowed to attend your classes in the following days? Of course. Now, keep in mind you won't be exempted from the end of the year's exam if you agree. Obviously, you won't be taking the same test, but you will have to attend one which I will conduct. I will give you the curriculum that you will need to follow, and I will give you all the material you need, but you will have to perform well if you hope to sit in my OWLs class. Is this clear? Of course, Professor. Hermione Granger already agreed to help me if you agreed. So? That won't do, said Professor babbling, shaking her head. I understand Miss Granger is a close friend of yours. Her smarts aside, I don't think she will objectively judge your efforts, Mr. Potter. I will select a student and you will get informed who that is, Mr. Potter. He could hardly refuse the professor, so he just nodded in agreement. Cutting the conversation short, he exchanged a few more words with the professor before he was on his way to the arithmancy class of the day. As far as strictness goes, Septima Vector looked far more agreeable than Bathsheba babbling. He was very fortunate to have picked arithmancy, as the subject was far easier to follow and study than divination by his standards. All that had to be truly remembered were just some key properties of numbers and the letter that is assigned to each number. Now the only caveat was that the letters used were Latin script and sometimes even runic symbols. A Latin dictionary would do the trick, and Latin was not that different from English, truth be told. The few letters that the language can't cover were covered by some basic runes. All in all, a wonderful subject to learn instead of slowly killing his brain cells in divination class. The class was not even covering some advanced stuff like spell creation. The subject only dealt with the numbers behind the creation of some famous spells. Maybe spell creation will come up next year or at Newt's level. And as luck would have it, he only had 1 hour of class that afternoon, which left him free to deal with some personal matters. Saying a hasty goodbye to Hermione, who was intent on going to the library, he went in the direction of Moody's class. By a stroke of luck, the second years also had only 1 hour of Moody's class. So, when he knocked on Moody's door, he was immediately welcomed in. Sit down, Potter. Now, what do you want? Harry got a bit distracted by the spinning fake eye on Moody's face, but he plowed on. Sir, I was just wondering, is there a spell that can translate sound to legitimate, understandable words? Moody smirked. Why ask me, laddie? It looks like you are looking for a translation charm, and last I checked, Professor Flitwick is far more experienced than me in charms. Here Harry hoped his acting skills were good enough to cover proper embarrassment. But, Professor Flitwick can't help me if it is related to the tournament. And last time you did offer me advice. Harry trailed off, hoping he looked authentic before the fraud. Ha! While you have the brains to look for a translation charm, I suggest you take a dip in water, Mr. Potter. What the air can't discern might unveil to you in a different medium, suggested Moody. Harry stared dumbly at Moody for a few seconds before he acted as if a veil was parting before his eyes. Of course. That makes so much sense, Professor. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, laddie, growled Moody, as he quickly began to scribble down something on a piece of parchment before handing it over to Harry. You showed an impressive piece of magic in the first task. But, the other champions will now take you seriously. I suggest you look up these books in the restricted section. I will write you a permission slip for Madame Pants. Now, that was a pleasant surprise. Harry read the parchment. Moody had written him a list of books. Some of them were books on creatures, some advanced charms and curses. There was one herbology book as well with a page number and everything. Clearly, Moody's desperation for setting up the final stage for Voldemort's resurrection was showing through. Shaking those thoughts away, he now had the perfect reason to use the egg under a water body. This would ease Moody's focus on him. At the same time, it'd seem like Moody has him fooled. That's the way he preferred, and Moody would remain his favorite data professor whom he looked up to until the completion of the final task. That's the image Harry will project, and that's what Barty Crouch Jr. will find if he is looking. Chapter 18, The Egg P2. The golden egg in Harry's hand gleamed under the open sky. The whole area around the Black Lake was filled with sleet, and he held no notion the water was warm for jumping in. It was downright suicidal to jump into any body of water at this time. But, the advantage of having control over magic is that no more such silly troubles. An average wizard with a minimum repertoire of spells is near godlike to muggles. A few variants of warming charms and repelling charms ensured his body remains warm under the cold depths of the Black Lake. He unzipped his jacket and wiggled out of it. He also took away his gray sweater as well. Harry, is this a good idea? Neville asked awkwardly, looking at the large lake sprawled out before them with a hint of fear. The message in the egg cannot be discerned when exposed to air. It needs water as a medium, he explained, stepping out of the pair of Nikes. I understand. Neville nodded before eyeing the lake anxiously, rubbing his hands. Don't you think you could have done that in the castle? That'd have been preferable. Instead, I have to do this to ensure a Death Eater prick remains assured of his false victory, thought Harry. He was sure Moody was watching him from somewhere right now. I think the Black Lake is the location for the second task, Harry said instead of the truth. Neville blinked in surprise and stared at the lake with apprehension. They'd do that. There is the this squid. Neville stuttered fearfully. Oh, come on, Neville. The giant squid has always been friendly with Hogwarts students. Harry patted Neville on the shoulder as he dived into the lake with the golden egg under his arm. Harry's head floated out of the lake, smiling at Neville. See? I'm perfectly fine. How about I take a swim to the other end? Can you please don't do that, Harry? If something happens to you, I won't be able to do anything. Neville stuttered out in fear as he worriedly looked around the lake as if the squid was about to attack. You are in luck then. Nothing is going to happen to me, said Harry, winking at a distraught Neville. Harry drew a full circle around his head with his wand. Bullatus operculum. A full air bubble covered his head, at which point he submerged underneath the water. The Black Lake, as the name suggested, looked dark and foggy when he looked outside the cover of his glasses. Looking through the Horus glasses, he could see far and deep except for the portions of the lake that were covered with dense seaweed. Securing his wand on the holster, he pried open the egg with his free hand. He beat his legs a bit to keep himself submerged under the water. The melodic voice of the merman filled his ears. Come seek us where our voices sound. We cannot sing above the ground. And while you're searching, ponder this. We've taken what you'll sorely miss. An hour long you'll have to look. And to recover what we took. But past an hour, the prospect's black. Too late, it's gone, it won't come back. Letting out a sigh of relief that the message remained the same, Harry closed the egg when it started to repeat the song once more. He swam back towards the edge of the lake and handed over the egg to a visibly relieved Neville. Harry climbed over the edge and began applying drying charms all over his body. Thank Merlin you're back, Harry. For a moment, I thought you drowned. You've to learn to fear less, Neville. If you fear every time, how will you enjoy the finer aspects of life? I don't know, Harry. Swimming in the Black Lake seems pretty fearful to me, said Neville. Harry shook his head before slipping into his clothes. He cast the shrinking charm on the egg before pocketing it. One of these days I'll break you out of your needless fears, said Harry, to which Neville merely shrugged helplessly. On their way back to the castle, Harry saw a few Muggleborns playing football in a corner. Hey, Harry, Neville. You two want to play? Dean Thomas shouted out. Harry was a bit surprised by the offer. Of course, the memories he had told him that the original Harry had refused the offer when Dean Thomas had first pitched the idea. Sure, he shouted back, thinking this was probably one of the best days. He was kind of a football fan and he was actually itching to play a game. Plus, it was a fun way to exercise and stay in shape. Want to join, Neville? Trust me, this is the first step to purge fear out of your body and mind, said Harry, turning to his chubby friend. I'm not so sure. Maybe, I'll just go. Neville never got to finish that thought as Harry just dragged Neville over to the game. We are playing, shouted Harry as he dragged Neville over to the makeshift football field the boys had constructed. A few minutes into the game, he was glad to say he was having quite a bit of fun while Neville looked like he was about to drop dead any minute. The field was filled with Muggleborns and a few half-bloods from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. It was another venue for socializing. All in all, a productive day. Harry and Dean had to almost carry Neville back to the Gryffindor Tower. Oh, come now, Neville. Don't tell me you didn't enjoy that game, said Dean, shaking a very tired Neville as they stepped into the common room with the fat lady's portrait closing behind their backs. I haven't run this much in my entire life. Neville gasped out. Don't be a baby. Harry admonished as he helped Neville into a nearby couch. What happened to Neville? Asked Hermione, barging in with a worried look on her face. We just played a bit of football, Hermione. Neville's just tired, that's all, said Dean. He'll be back on his feet in a jiffy, said Harry, patting Neville on his shoulder. After taking a shower, he joined the others in the Great Hall for dinner. After that, he was back to the dorms where he spent most of the night reading the notes left by Tom Riddle in the chamber. There were quite a few interesting curses and wards the budding Dark Lord was researching. Even so, the rituals interested him far more. Harry had only scratched the surface, and even then, he could see why Voldemort was so powerful the first time around. To enhance wandless magic, Tom Riddle had constructed a ritual using the basilisk scales the Serpent King had shed in the chamber. There were even some dark rituals that enhanced the bodily prowess of Voldemort using the basilisk poison and unicorn blood. While those were quite interesting, there was another ritual that caught his eyes. A ritual that granted unsustained flight for a wizard. Now, that's one badass ability to possess, he thought. His attention jumped from the notes to Ron, who noisily marched into the dorm. When Ron took note of his presence, he just let out a huff and jumped into the bed, keeping his face away from Harry. Harry shrugged and went back to reading. Ever since he made it clear that he was dropping Muggle studies and divination, Ron had been rather cross with him. The date with Daphne also might be rubbing the redhead the wrong way. Frankly speaking, he cared not for Ron's opinions. If anything, he preferred where they stood at the present. He often felt like he had a jealous girlfriend with Ron hanging around. Other boys started to stream in after whatever they were doing in the common room. You okay, Neville? I'm fine, Harry. Although, I think I might sleep through the next day, said Neville tiredly, plopping into the bed with a thud. Don't worry, mate. We'll make sure you get up tomorrow, said Dean. Harry eyed the Muggle-born boy curiously. Hey, Dean. Exactly which days you're playing the game? Planning to join us from now on, eh? Dean asked with his eyes shining with excitement. Yeah, sure. I was thinking it might be a good idea. I could use some practice. Used to play at my old school, but nowadays I'm out of practice. Hey, you weren't that bad. We play every Saturday and Sunday from 3 in the evening, said Dean. Ha! Sign me up from now on. Sure, Harry, said Dean. Harry nodded and secured the notes back in his trunk, which he magically locked and warded. With Voldemort's handwritten notes on dark rituals and some other shady magic in his possession, he didn't feel it safe to let his trunk remain unguarded. So the first thing he did was to learn a suitable ward that could provide a modicum of protection from Sirius. Ensuring everything was in order, he turned himself in for the night. Closing his eyes, he toiled to keep out all his thoughts and emotions as required by a budding occlumens. Keeping his mind a blank slate, he slowly slipped into the state of deep sleep. XXXXXXX. Stella Munition. Harry looked over to the blackboard where a complicated Anglo-Saxon runic script was drawn in a star formation. A portion of the board suddenly became clear to his eyes, and it was filled with explanations for each rune being used. Runes tend to take a different meaning from time to time. Sometimes a rune can mean nothing and is merely used for numerical significance. Sometimes a rune could be used to heighten a certain position, which could be synonymous with the position of a planet or the sun. The sun rune, as you can see, is positioned at the very center of the star. The 6 tips, on the other hand, has runes signifying 6 planets of our system. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter and Neptune, said Professor babbling as she pointed out the specific runes representing these planets. Interestingly enough, the planets are always represented by Egyptian hieroglyphs. Harry theorized the runic scripts for planets in other languages are far longer. The Egyptian hieroglyphs have one specific symbol for each planet. The goal of a wizard who uses runes is always to shorten the script as much as possible. As the volume of the script increases, the margin of error also increases. Egyptian hieroglyphs are the key to shorten any runic scripts, and that brings chances of any errors down as well. The Stella Munition is a runic ward used commonly to strengthen buildings from outside attacks. Not just building, they can be used to protect any physical object provided they are placed on the earth. Hermione had her hand raised the moment Professor babbling paused her lecture. Yes, Miss Granger. Why is it that this specific set of runes does not work in the absence of Earth, Professor? Asked Hermione. Because of the significance of the 6 planets. The rune draws its power from the Earth through the Earth rune. Anything not grounded in Earth is under the jurisdiction of either Jupiter or Neptune. Say that you want an object to be guarded, but the object is above a body of water. The ship of Durmstrang School, for example, needs the Neptune rune in place of Earth. Harry remained a passive participant as he had a long way to go in learning all the runes and understand their uses. He even needed to learn to draw many of them, but for the most part, he found the class very interesting. Professor babbling continued the lecture by describing the different effects when certain portions of the script were to be swapped. When the bell rang towards the end of the class, Harry had not even felt the time pass. Mr. Potter. Professor babbling called out to him before he took his leave. Professor? Professor babbling handed him a stack of parchment. These are all the notes that you will find useful. Thank you, Professor. Harry accepted the stack of parchment with a nod. Right. And as for your tutor, meet Miss Davis. Professor babbling pointed at the thin Slytherin who flashed him a grin from his back. Harry had some choice words in his mind for choosing a Slytherin. He didn't believe Professor babbling was blind to the drama going on in Hogwarts, but he kept his mouth shut and nodded along. I see. I'll be on my way then. Off you go, Potter. Harry turned away from the ancient runes professor and marched out of the classroom. Outside the classroom, Tracy Davis was waiting for him, and so was Hermione and Daphne. I suppose you are my tutor, said Harry, frowning at a beaming Tracy. It's funny, isn't it? Who'd have thought Professor babbling has a sense of humor? Appointing a Slytherin to teach a Gryffindor. Tracy said, chuckling. Very amusing. So, when can we start Tutor Davis? Harry asked. Tutor Davis? Just call me Tracy. Then you may call me Harry. Tracy gave him a quick grin before turning to Daphne. There, see, he's not bad. Now, that won't do. He can't allow the two to think they could be so easily dismissive of him. Oh, don't be so sure. I can be very bad when I want to be. Harry was sure the 2 Slytherins were reminded of his swift, harmless retribution for wearing those silly badges. It was also a subtle message to not screw up his chances to study ancient runes. Message received, said Tracy, rolling her eyes. Now, before we can talk about the schedule, there is something Daphne has to discuss with you, privately. The last part was said with Tracy staring pointedly at Hermione. And that's how Harry found himself in the astronomy tower with Daphne Greengrass. All right. Now that we are alone, go ahead. Harry looked on intently as Daphne fished out an envelope from a pouch under the cover of her cloak. A messa. Age from my father, said Daphne, handing over the envelope. After scanning the envelope with a few detection charms, he secured it inside his backpack. You are paranoid, noted Daphne. I prefer the word cautious, said Harry. He could see Daphne's blue eyes flash with an unknown emotion. It passed away in a blink and she was back to her usual self. There is one more issue, said Daphne, and this time he picked up the rosy tint on her cheeks. We need to discuss the color of our dress robes. For Harry, this was a major letdown and he stared incredulously at Daphne for a moment. It was then he remembered he was dealing with a 14-year-old girl. Sometimes, he'd often forget he was surrounded by a bunch of teenagers. Of course, Daphne was going to be interested in dresses rather than some grand secret scheme. As he feared, a better part of his free time was spent listening to color schemes suggested by Daphne, who he found has a fetish for all things blue. It was an interesting observation he made, seeing as the rest of the talk went over his head. Chapter 19, The Yule Ball P1. Red-hot flames nearly managed to swallow him whole, but Harry put up a hasty protego that shielded him from getting burning to a crisp. Rather than staying idle, he felt the need to move, and he was proven right when his shield broke with the sound of shattering glass. He tried to put some distance, but he was immediately forced to use a blasting curse on a transfigured bird that tried to peck him on his head. The very next moment he felt his wand jump out of his hands courtesy of the disarming spell. Ha! You lost again, said Sirius, holding Harry at one point. You seem like you won a dueling championship while all you did was beat a 14-year-old wizard in a duel. Harry said blandly while taking his wand back from Sirius. No. I won against the Hogwarts champion who single-handedly wiped the floor with a dragon. Not to mention this 14-year-old wizard beat Voldemort when he was a baby, said Sirius, oozing mischief in his words. Fair point. Someday I'm going to wipe the floor with you. I'm eagerly waiting for that day, Prongslet. Prongslet? Harry asked with a quirked eyebrow. You know, since you are the son of Prongs, said Sirius. Ha! I guess that makes sense. Harry shrugged, not minding the nickname. So, what did I do wrong in the duel? Sirius sat down, followed by Harry on one of the couches as Winky popped in with 2 glasses of orange juice. Thanking Winky, he took a few gulps of the juice from his glass. In a magical duel, flame charms are the most useless piece of magic except if the spell is darker in nature. The reason being, flame-repelling charms can allow a wizard to withstand normal magical fires. So usually, flames are used as a distraction in duels, explained Sirius. Well, I certainly didn't use flame-repelling charms on myself. Harry muttered. Ensure that you do so before engaging another wizard in a duel. Although, more experienced wizards have another way of dealing with fire. How? Harry asked, leaning forward curiously. You could either dispel the flames or you could turn the flames on the caster, which is far more complex, said Sirius, who drained his glass of the orange juice, which once again filled up courtesy of Winky. How does that happen? There are simple spells for dispelling flames. As for taking control of the flames, you must learn to exert your will on the element. Exert my will? What do you mean? Asked Harry, interested by the prospect. Elemental spells are all about magical power and will. The one who can exert more will through their magical power will win the battle of elements. Harry looked thoughtful at Sirius' explanation. In a strange way, it sort of made sense. Are you saying that if someone throws a bolt of lightning at me I can just overpower the will of the castor? Harry asked, frowning at Sirius. Trust me, Harry. You don't want to be at the receiving end of a wizard's wand who can spout lightning bolts. Of all the elements, lightning remains the most difficult element to properly defend from simply because they pack too much power and they are very quick. Harry mulled that over in his head a little bit. He could see why Sirius thought lightning was the most difficult spell to counter. From his admittedly small research, lightning spells were most difficult to master. But, he didn't think lightning spells were powerful enough to be undefendable like the unforgivable curses. What about using a shield based on a vacuum? Asked Harry. Huh? What do you mean? Sirius blinked in confusion. Lightning can only pass if there is a medium to form a potential difference. In vacuum there is no potential difference, so there won't be a flow of electrons, which means no lightning, said Harry. Right. I haven't got the foggiest clue what you just said. But, you sound like your mother. Harry sighed. This was a waste of time anyway. There was no point in actually concentrating on dueling and fancy spells when all he had to look forward to in a few weeks was to rescue someone from the bottom of the Black Lake. Setting that aside, I received a letter from Damian Greengrass, said Harry. You did? Sirius looked up in surprise, still drinking from the juice glass. What did he say? He wants to meet preferably on the next Hogsmeade weekend, said Harry, leaning back into the couch. I know almost nothing of what Damian was up to in the last war. The man had most likely slipped out of the country. Sirius let out a bark of laughter before a pint of remorse entering Sirius' eyes. He probably saved his family by doing that. James and Lily should have done the same. They fought for what they believed in. Sirius, said Harry softly, understanding Sirius' position. No cuz is worth the price James and Lily paid Harry. Looking back, I should have pressured them to leave the country once we knew your mother was pregnant. No doubt, it was one of my greatest failures. Some friend I am, muttered Sirius darkly. Harry got the urge to defend that the cause of bringing down a bunch of fascists and terrorists was worth the price, but thought better of it. It'd be foolish of him to be inconsiderate of Sirius' pain. Sitting before him was someone who abandoned his family to join the other side of the war knowing he was bound to fight his family. That sort of decision took guts, and he was not going to demean the guy in his weakest moment. Besides, who was he to reserve judgment on the worthiness of the cause when the cause never panned out in the first place? All that blood spilt, only for the ministry and the supposed light side to welcome in cold-blooded murderers and rapists with open arms. The only losers in the war were those who lost their loved ones and their way of life. In that context, he agreed with Sirius. No cause was worth that amount of blood spilt when the cause they were fighting for was an illusion, to begin with. It was almost 14 years since the war came to a conclusion, and what results did the ministry had to show for it? To someone like Sirius, who had spent more than a decade in Azkaban, the whole validity of the cause might not mean anything. It was then Harry found some renewed respect for Sirius, who still bothered to continue with his life. If it was him, he'd have most likely escaped the country and never looked back. The fact that Sirius even bothered to stick around made Sirius a better man. You know what? There was no dark or light side in the last war. There was the side led by terrorists and there was the side led by apathetic hypocrites, said Harry, resolve filling his eyes. This time, we will crush them both and burn out the forest for new growth. Harry, I'd rather you don't involve yourself with all this. That's where you are wrong, Sirius. I can't run from it. One side will seek my death while the other will try to use me as a pawn. The only option is to destroy them both, and that's what I'm going to do. XXXXXXXXXX. The excitement of the Yule Ball could be seen among the student populace depending on where you looked. The third years, second years, and first years were probably devastated that they wouldn't get to participate in the Yule Ball. Although, Harry was sure quite a few were happy they would be home instead of asking a girl to the ball. There was a lot of teen angst going around in Hogwarts. If this ball was some regular event like a prom or something, Harry reckoned there might not have been this much anxiety. Instead, everyone was hyper-anxious about their dates, clothes, dance steps, and whatnot. The Gryffindor common room sort of became a platform for gossips, which was not saying much, but Harry reckoned it was worse than ever. Everyone was interested in who turned down who, who's going with whom, how did someone handle a rejection, etc. In fact, even the teaching staff sort of gave up attempting to teach anything new. What with everyone discussing the music band Weird Sisters and which music they were going to play. Or the ridiculous rumors like a 700-foot-tall cheesecake that Dumbledore apparently ordered. Or the 1,000 barrels of mulled mead that was supposedly going to be served. Harry even heard a rumor that claimed the dragons used in the tasks were rendered for their flesh and fried dragon hearts were to be served for the champions. There were even rumors that Hagrid's blast-ended scruts were on the menu. Hagrid was not particularly delighted by that piece of news, but he had seen many hopeful and even eager looks amongst many students when that bit of rumor took traction. The good part about teachers not being strict with their portions, Harry had less homework to worry about. This meant he could use his time to cover portions of arithmancy and ancient runes. Of course, credit had to be given to Tracy, who so far had shown up almost consistently to tutor him. Sometimes, even Daphne also joined in their study session. Hermione, it'd seem, was the one who was most excited about the study group. She seems intent to make friends with Daphne and Tracy. In so far, Hermione was slowly succeeding. In a way, Harry could understand why Hermione was very eager to make friends with the two Slytherins. There were very few in Hogwarts among the female spectrum that Hermione liked. She tolerated Parvati and Lavender cause they were her roommates. The Ravenclaws were more her speed, but for some reason, she didn't get along that well with the Claws. So, finding two Slytherin girls who are academically inclined as she is must be a ray of hope for Hermione. Not to mention, both Tracy and Daphne seemed hardly bothered by Hermione's ability to go on a tangent when it comes to random bits and pieces she read in some book. All right. Enough about Anglo-Saxon runes. I think I'm going to be bored to tears if we continue anymore, said Tracy, closing her ancient runes textbook with a snap. I suppose. Harry shrugged, closing his books and packing all the parchment into his bag. I forgot to ask. Who are you going with to the ball? Asked Harry curiously. Michael Corner, answered Tracy, who proceeded to slap her forehead. I almost forgot. I was supposed to meet him near the Great Hall. Tracy picked up her pace with Harry lagging behind his Slytherin friend. On his back, Hermione and Daphne were quietly whispering. He tried to pick up on their conversation, but it was sort of difficult as the two were very secretive in their exchange. When they finally reached the Great Hall's entrance, there was a small crowd gathered. The entrance was packed with boys from Durmstrang and Hogwarts. Harry took note that many of them were pushing and pulling amongst themselves. Apparently, there was something very interesting going on here at the entrance to the Great Hall. Tracy managed to shove away the boys and Harry helped her as she was in a rush. It was only when the two of them managed to wade through the crowd did they find the cause of this rush. Harry was greeted by the sight of a swooning Ron who was on his knees before Fleur Delacour. Harry gaped at the ridiculous pose Ron was making with his left hand on his heart and the right hand extended towards Fleur as if asking for her hand. Will you please go to the ball with me? There was nothing wrong with the question itself except for the fact that Ron was sporting a stupid smile on his face as if he was on ecstasy. There was pin-drop silence as everyone looked from Ron to the French champion who looked like she was just asked to the ball by a slug. In the end, Fleur didn't have to respond as Ron suddenly came to his senses. For a moment, the redhead Weasley looked around at the gathered crowd. Harry could see the growing horror on Ron's face. Ron turned tail and ran with gales of laughter following after him. Well, that was entertaining, said Tracy, with suppressed laughter. That was horrible. She used her charm, said Hermione, with disapproval rolling off her in waves. I don't think it was intentional, said Daphne, nodding at Cedric Diggory, who now chose to part ways from the French champion. After that fiasco, Harry and Hermione separated ways from the two Slytherins. The two of them found Ron in the Gryffindor common room looking completely flustered. Harry, don't tease him, warned Hermione. Hey, why'd you think I am about to do that? Asked Harry, offended. Because Ron has not been kind to you, but I don't want you to stoop to his level. Harry raised his hand disarmingly. All right. I will be silent as a grave. Somehow, Ron took that moment to look in their direction and that made Ron rush towards them. Hermione, said Ron as he rushed up to Hermione, looking rather mortified. Ron, are you okay? Asked Hermione, after giving Harry a silent stare. I asked Fleur Delacour to the ball, said Ron as his eyes widened, looking like a fish out of water. What was I thinking? Harry had the urge to say really? You can think? But, as promised, he kept his mouth firmly shut and slowly moved himself to a corner where the twins were marketing their fake wands to a first eye. "Hey, Harry. Want to buy one of our fake wands?" asked George. "No." "But, I heard you guys made flaming fart candies. You have those for sale?" asked Harry. "Ha! Now we are talking, Harry," said Fred, who smiled gleefully. "Looks like someone just pissed you off. Is it Ronikins?" "Not Ron, although that's tempting. But no. I was rather thinking I should send a Christmas present to my relatives." "Oh." Fred and George giggled with a matching wicked grin. "Tell you what, Harry. I think I like that idea." "So, how many do you want?" asked George. "I know you guys are serious about that joke shop of yours. I'll pay you double for all the flaming fart candies you have." "You don't have to do that," Fred protested. Before they could do anything else, Ron and Hermione's arguing cut across their conversation. "You know, Hermione, you are a girl." "Really, what gave you that clue?" asked Hermione, in a sour voice, as she looked at Ron with her arms crossed. "Well, I do still need a date for the Yule Ball, and I was wondering if you want to come with me," said Ron slowly. "It's not like you have a date." "For your information, Ronald, I do in fact have a date," hissed Hermione, looking a bit angry now. "Oh, come on, Hermione. You don't have to lie." "Do you want to go to the ball with me?" asked Ron. "Don't take this the wrong way, but I can't believe he is your brother," and he just said that to Hermione's face. Harry whispered to the twins. "Oh, he is our brother Harry," said Fred. "Maybe Mum's hand slipped when Ronikins was a baby, but he's our brother," supplied George. Hermione, it'd seem, finally reached her limit in patience and promptly punched Ron in his face. "Awa!" Ron yelped, stumbling back. You do have a date." "Yes, Ron. Just because it has taken you 3 years to notice that I am in fact a girl does not mean that everyone else is blind," said Hermione, before adding under breath. "Or stupid for that matter." Hermione walked off, leaving Ron standing in the middle of the common room looking like an idiot. Harry shrugged before turning to the twins. "So, what about those flame farting candies we were talking about?" XXXXXXXX. The next morning Harry didn't go for his usual routine of training. He was instead present in the common room, sitting down on a chair nearby the fireplace. Not that he was looking to get warm, as a simple warming charm would do the trick. No. Rather, he was just thinking of the meeting that was scheduled today. There were many thoughts flying through his mind. The conversation with Sirius also stayed with him, and whenever he closed his eyes he could only see Sirius' half-dead gray eyes. The fact that the head of DMLE was directly intervening and was about to interrogate him despite all tangible evidence pointed to the fact that Sirius was never given a trial didn't sit well with him. What bothered him most was that Madame Bones had her brother and sister-in-law murdered by Death Eaters, and yet she is content to turn a blind eye to these Death Eaters running free. Harry could understand the woman has her hands tied when she inherited the position, as by then many Death Eaters were cleared of all charges by the Ministry. Yet, he could not fathom why Amelia Bones has not pushed to investigate the attack on the Quidditch World Cup. He remained silent and disenchanted with the rest of the conversation as he was mulling over these thoughts about Sirius, the First Wizarding War, and the Ministry. Ron had once again started bitching and moaning, but thankfully the redhead nuisance was bothering Hermione. Apparently, Ron was now obsessed with finding who was Hermione going out with, and Hermione seems to contend to keep Ron in the dark. The day continued despite Ron's innumerable failed attempts in diving the identity of Hermione's date. It was in the last minutes of the first hour of his history class Dumbledore called for his presence. Cockroach cluster. The gargoyle stepped aside, permitting Harry to climb the spiraling stairs towards Dumbledore's office. The doors of the office remained open. Inside, he could see a tall black-haired witch wearing silky black robes sitting opposite Dumbledore. "Ah, Harry. Please do come in. Mr. Potter. We meet at last, face to face. I'm Andromeda Tonks." Harry shook the witch's hands. "Glad to meet you, Mrs. Tonks. Now, Harry. We don't have much time, but I hope you remember my advice. I strongly recommend you stay silent in this conversation. Let me answer Madam Bones. She won't be able to force you to answer as you are an underage wizard. Harry merely nodded, showing that he understood. Harry, it is imperative that you keep your silence. As I'm standing in as your guardian in the absence of your family, I shall discourage Madam Bones from taking too many liberties," said Dumbledore. Both Dumbledore and Mrs. Tonks continued to give him counsel, stressing the need for him to shut up until finally, the flue flared up with green flames. And from those flames, a stern-looking witch stepped out, followed by two others. Dumbledore, Mrs. Tonks. The red-haired woman greeted sharply before her sharp eyes traced his face before resting on his scar. Mr. Potter. The witch nodded sharply before turning her attention to Dumbledore and Andromeda Tonks. Harry took the time to take a look at the two companions of Amelia Bones. Clearly, they were Aurors. From the adults' conversation, he put the names on each of their faces. The Auror wearing a blue cloche hat was Kingsley Shacklebolt. Shacklebolt looked more like an Auror as the guy was always on the lookout. The other Auror, who sported blonde hair and frankly looked like a ponce, was John Dawlish. Once the introductions were over, Harry was sitting opposite to Amelia Bones, who scrutinized him with her sharp brown eyes. Harry, meanwhile, employed all that he learned in his occlumency studies to remain as a brick wall in the emotional spectrum. Mr. Potter, let's begin. We have reason to believe you are harboring or perhaps unwittingly aiding a dangerous fugitive. The opening itself made Harry predisposed to dislike Amelia Bones. But he didn't so much as twitch. He stayed silent and let his attorney handle the law enforcement officers. Madam Bones, please specify your questioning. Who is this dangerous fugitive? I'm of course talking about Sirius Black, said Madam Bones. By what definition are you claiming Sirius Black is a fugitive? By the definition the Ministry of Magic has given Mr. Black. Me Black is on the run from the law, so he remains a fugitive, replied Madam Bones. I'm afraid your question is not legally sound, Madam Bones. What crime has Mr. Black committed? His crime is breaking into Hogwarts illegally. I believe he tried to enter Gryffindor common room. If you are going to deny that, please remember I do have my niece in Mr. Potter's year. Harry glanced at both Dumbledore and Andromeda Tonks as they were a bit flat-footed with the way the interrogation had gone. Indeed, Harry could see the angle by which Madam Bones was playing. She was not looking for Sirius for a crime that he was wrongfully accused of, but rather for a crime he did commit. Those carefully constructed occlumency shields in his mind were not enough to contain the sheer outrage he was feeling at the moment. Just how low can these politicians go for a momentary gain? Their callousness and arrogance to disregard what Sirius had suffered, all to get an upper hand in the political arena. Harry then realized Madam Bones, while pressured to be present today by the ministry, has her own agenda. He suspected she hopes to score some political scoop by capturing Sirius Black well ahead of the scheduled trial. If such a thing happened, he suspected Madam Bones would get a boost in popularity. Or maybe, the ministry would look good by doing so. Or it could be that the DMLE hoped to strike a deal with Sirius and force him to not pursue legal action against the DMLE for his unjust imprisonment. Is that right, Madam Bones? I suppose your niece is willing to verify the validity of your accusation against Sirius Black. Andromeda Tonks prodded. She doesn't have to, as Hogwarts staff's actions on that night is cause enough. I'm afraid, Amelia, you are terribly wrong. I assume Sirius Black was responsible that day, as I was also under the misconception of Sirius' past. Obviously, I was wrong. Most likely it was Peter Pettigrew who tried to make a forced entry into the Gryffindor Tower, said Dumbledore, looking over his half-moon spectacles at Madam Bones. Truly, Dumbledore. You expect me to believe? Harry got tired of this pathetic show put forth by Amelia Bones. He should not have been that much surprised. Those in power will always try to cover their asses. Sirius' case was only going to blow open a hole in the ministry, and he had no doubt the DMLE was going to take the lion's share of the blame. Madam Bones, what is it that you hope to achieve today? You seem intent to pin blame on Sirius Black for everything that happened under the sun? Harry asked, breaking his silence. Mr. Potter. Mind your words. No. I don't think I will. If you are here to make a case to have Sirius come to a deal so that the gross incompetence of the DMLE will not blow back against you, then you have wasted a handful of flu powder, said Harry, standing up from his seat. I will see to it that the DMLE will pay reparations even if it bankrupts the entire Ministry of Magic. Before today, I'd have been amenable to a backroom deal, but this conversation has shown just why murderers like Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, Avery, and Nott are walking free while my godfather languished in Azkaban for 13 years without a trial. I wish you all the best in the days to come, Amelia Bones. You will need it. With that last parting shot, Harry made his way outside of the office. Mr. Potter, I'm not done with my questions. Then ask away. My attorney will answer all your queries. I'd better things to do with my valuable time rather than spending it on a useless politician. After saying that, Harry closed the door behind him and took off to his history class. On the way, he found a broom closet which he immediately took refuge in. Once he was sure he was all alone, he let go of the occlumency shields which crumbled under the wave of anger he had struggled to hold back. The entire broom closet rumbled and was promptly blown back from his violent magical energy surge. Taking several deep breaths, Harry tried to calm down. Once he was sure he purged the surging anger in his system, he stepped out of the ruined broom closet. Giving one last look to the sorry shape of the broom closet, he took his leave. He was confident Andromeda Tonks can deal with Madame Bones on her own. Chapter 20, The Yule Ball P2. The perks of being a minor are that there are very few laws that affect him directly. The most consequential law for a minor in the wizarding world is the misuse of magic, and that only affected the Muggleborns in most cases or other half-bloods who live in the Muggle world like Harry. Owing to this simple fact that most other laws can only apply to a minor in the most extreme of cases and are usually derived from the misuse of magic, Harry would remain scot-free. The simple fact of the matter is, he was a minor, which means he remained under the protective custody of an adult. In Harry's case, it was Petunia Disley. Which means legally he remained under the protection of a Muggle. So, the natural question would be, how come a minor can give protection to Sirius Black, the notorious mass murderer the Ministry has trotted up as the right-hand man of the Dark Lord? It was this defense Andromeda Tonks used to slap away the DMLE. It turns out that his abrupt exit from the meeting turned out to be a blessing than a curse. Andromeda Tonks framed his abrupt exit on Amelia Bones and her baseless accusations against his innocent godfather. After all, Harry remained an orphan, and it was quite natural for a 14-year-old to behave as he did in Dumbledore's office. So, what happened was that Andromeda Tonks threatened to file a case against the DMLE for flinging baseless accusations against a minor and causing emotional trauma. Of course, such a case may not stand in the court of law, but it would certainly play a part in the court of public opinion. According to Mrs. Tonks, it was one more stick to be used against the Ministry to speed up the trial date. Of course, all of that meant he was seriously evaluating his stupid idea to get emancipated. He had not actually shared that idea with anyone so far. The idea has been floating around in his head, but seeing that the laws are heavily rigged in favor of a minor, he was seriously thinking of abandoning the emancipation idea. Besides, based on his understanding so far, there was hardly much of a cause for him to get emancipated in the first place. Harry could probably build a strong case against Petunia and Vernon, but what would be the point? He could punish those two on his own, and the Ministry may decide to transfer his guardianship to another wizarding family, which was not at all good. The only other legal avenue that was before him was the Tri-Wizard tournament itself, but that turned out to be a dead end on his considerable research. Turns out, there is no legally binding written contract involved in the Tri-Wizard tournament. The magical binding that forces the selected contestants to participate in the tournament is held by the Goblet of Fire. This binding cannot be taken as legal merit to advocate emancipation, as the contract is not at all based on the perceived majority attained by the champions. The only basic requirement to be selected by the Goblet of Fire is magic, not age. The Ministry wouldn't recognize his participation in the tournament as grounds for emancipation, as the tournament or the Ministry never championed only wizards or witches of majority can participate. That little bit of additional condition came from Dumbledore rather than the Ministry, which was aimed at decreasing the chances of any fatal injuries among the champions. So legally speaking, there was no standing document that would validate Harry's route to emancipation. Besides, What was the point of getting emancipated anyway? It is not as if Dumbledore or anyone else can force something upon him without his consent. Petunia could have done something like that, but she does not have a shred of magic. Anything she does is invalid in the magical world. This means he was quasi-emancipated and he didn't see any reason to change that status. With that bit of drama dealt with, Harry could now relax a bit for the time being. This was the last day of class and sadly the day ended with double potions. Snape has been far mellowed out, but the greasy bat would shoot him blares throughout the class. So long as the man stayed far away from his mind, Harry was happy to avoid the guy. It is not as if he was actively seeking out a confrontation with Snape. Either way, with the meeting happening ahead of the Yule Ball and the holidays, he got some tension-free days ahead. There was the backbreaking homework to look forward to and some special classes in arithmancy. And he was sure Snape was only going to contribute to that workload today. After 3 hours of breathing in potion fumes inside the dungeons, Harry left the lair of the greasy git with loads of homework. It was as if Snape was intent on squeezing out as much misery into their life to even out the excitement involved in the Yule Ball. That greasy git. He is purposefully burying us with homework. Ron cursed the moment they came out of the potions class. Maybe you can enjoy the holidays if you finish all the homework early, Hermione suggested non-committally. You are mental, claimed Ron. Really, Weasley, said Malfoy, sauntering out from behind them. You are calling that mudblood mental when you are the worst mental case Hogwarts has ever seen. Who else but you could think you can ask out the French champion? Malfoy and much of the Slytherins behind him proceeded to laugh away as Ron's ears turned red at the reminder. Harry thought of intervening but then decided to continue his trek back to the common room. He'd be wasting valuable time by exchanging insults with Malfoy for little to no gain. So, he didn't wait for Ron's response, and he was not alone as Neville quickly caught up to him. So did you ask Ginny? He asked Neville. Oh, yes. I did ask her after the lunch break and she said yes, said Neville. That's good. Harry patted Neville on the back, happy for his friend to have secured a date. Neville had at first asked Hermione, but since she was going with Crumb she said no. Since then, Harry had prodded Neville to ask Lavender or Parvati, but Neville was too shy and afraid of rejection. Finally, Neville seems to have found some courage to ask Ginny, and that was only after Harry had dragged his friend to seek permission from the twins. XXXXXXXX. Harry didn't get the feeling that he was necessarily in a holiday week, so to speak. If anything, Professor Vector had taken a renewed vigor to cram as much information regarding arithmancy down his throat. It was a good thing that he was ultimately giddy to learn all that his professor had to offer him, if only so that he could make flashy spells in the future. Other than his regular extra classes with Professor Vector, he was pretty much a free bird. With Dean and many other Muggleborns opting to stay behind, they held regular football games throughout the week. Heavy snowing and bone-chilling cold could hardly keep them away from enjoying a good game of football. Besides, some of the 7th years had put up repelling wards that kept out the sleet from messing with their playing field. Fred and George came through with their promise of delivering him a whole box of flaming fart candies. For good measure, they even threw in a few pig squeal toffees, a new product courtesy of the wicked mind of the twins. He had Dobby plant the candies around the Dursley household, which should be more than enough trouble for the Dursleys. He was sure Dudley would easily fall to the prank. But he was not done yet. He had asked Dobby to sneak in the candies into their food as well, to make sure all three would experience the worst Christmas they ever had. And he was just getting started on punishing the Dursleys. Harry sat near a window with quite a view of the castle grounds. There was nothing much to look at as everything was covered in snow. Even so, it was a wonderful view. As far as his eyes could see, everything looked painted in white. Harry, it's time for dinner. Neville called out to him, breaking him from his thoughts. The whole castle had gone over a bit of interior remodeling to reflect the Christmas atmosphere. Well, more like the celebration should have been pagan in nature, as Daphne had often told him whenever he met up with his date from time to time. She was more passionate about such things, and he kind of get where she was coming from. Christmas had almost nothing to do with the wizarding world, as wizards celebrate winter solstice or Natalie's Solis Invicti, the celebration of the unconquered sun. From what Daphne had told him, the celebration is supposed to symbolize the surge of light magic in the world, or at least the western part of the world. The sun would begin to gain more influence in the west during this period, and all healing magic would gain strength during this period. It is also the time for cleansing rituals to take place, as the emergence of the sun is seen to strengthen the potency of rituals. Instead, Hogwarts celebrated the winter solstice as Christmas. Almost everyone else he knew cared not for the old traditions. And thus, Hogwarts sported the usual Christmas trees with some fabulous charm work done as always by Professor Flitwick to lighting up the tress. Many colorful lamps lit the hallways of the castle, bathing the hallways in warm colorful lights. The house elves in the kitchen outdone themselves by serving savory puddings and deliciously spicy meats that flared the taste buds of anyone. Frankly speaking, Dumbledore seems to have taken it upon himself to treat their guests with lavish feasts and colorful lights. Only the French champion seemed to find faults, as the rest were either staying silent or they were pretty much satisfied. The Durmstrang lot seemed quite content, so to speak. Although, it could be never ascertained what they were thinking, as they always seemed so serious most of the time. On Christmas morning, Harry woke up to see Dobby tiptoeing his way towards the pile of presents near his bed. "Dobby, what are you doing?" Harry asked, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes as he slowly sat up in his four-poster bed. "Dobby is sorry, sir," squeaked Dobby, his ears flopping downward sadly. "Dobby never meant to wake you up, sir." Dobby just wanted to give Harry Potter, sir, his present. "Wait. You brought me a present?" he asked, flummoxed. "Of course, sir." "Can Dobby give Harry Potter, sir, his present?" "Of course you can," said Harry. Dobby immediately handed him a small package wrapped in a green cover. Harry unwrapped his present and a pair of socks. The left one was red while the right remained green. "Thanks, Dobby." Harry smiled at his elfish friend before he remembered he had to give a gift in return. "I have something for you as well in Winky." "Winky." With a customary pop, Winky teleported into the room. "Master," Harry called. "Oh, yes. I have gifts for you both," said Harry as he opened his trunk, fishing out 2 boxes of chocolate cashew nuts as well as 2 pairs of socks he had all ordered from Hogsmeade. Originally they were supposed to be his, but he could always order a new pair. "Dobby loves socks and chocolate, Harry Potter, sir." "Dobby is very thankful, sir, very thankful indeed." "Master is too kind to Winky." And Winky never brought Master any presents. Bad Winky. The rest of his morning was spent consoling Winky, who was distraught she never brought him a present. How could she when she refused to take wages from him? He literally had to force Winky to buy certain things for herself with the wages he assigned for her. Harry spent the rest of the day in the tower rather than outside, as he took the day off from any outside activity. It's just that with everyone being very excited, he found some solace in staying in the castle. When the evening finally approached, he saw Hermione return to the tower early, and so did the rest of the girls. Only the boys stayed out far longer. At 7 o'clock, Harry was ready in his attire for the ball. He chose the standard prom attire, which was always functional in any formal setting. He had to sneak away from the castle to London for getting the whole set ready, but with 2 house elves in his employ, anything was possible. Harry was dressed in trousers, a white shirt, a black bow tie, a black jacket, black tuxedo with some cufflinks and studs. Not to mention the brand new shiny pair of leather black shoes. He also took great care to resolve the mess that was his hair with a handful of hair gel. "Harry, a bit of help here please," said Dean, who was struggling with his bow tie. Being a good Samaritan, Harry took up the moment to aid his friend. "Huh, you look good, Harry." "I thought you might go for dress robes," said Dean. "I find the robes in the magical world far more flamboyant." "This is more comfortable," said Harry, while folding the bow tie carefully to make the butterfly knot. After finishing with Dean's bow tie, Harry took his leave to the Great Hall. The large oak doors remained closed, with many students waiting patiently outside. Harry managed to sneak through the crowd looking for Daphne. After waiting through the crowd for some time, he found her on a corner surrounded by a number of her Slytherin peers. There were even a few upperclassmen involved. From his point of view, it looked like there was a problem. So, he took precautions before he stepped into the lair of snakes. XXXXXXXXX. Greengrass, I hope you understand what you are doing. You will be attracting quite a lot of enemies by pulling this stunt. Daphne fought the urge to roll her eyes. Truly, what was Montague going to do? Go cry to his mother she was going with Potter to the Yule Ball? She lamented the falling standards of her house. Half of House Slytherin were filled with lackwits and bullies without a bone of cunning or ambition in them. Well, there was ambition in some form, Daphne amended her thoughts. It's just that the ambition many of her housemates harbored is to become an exact replica of their parents. And Montague was not the worst of the lot. No, the absolute worst was Malfoy, who seems to have forgotten his humiliating defeat at the hands of Potter. I can't believe a Greengrass would even think of touching that half-blood mongrel. I will be having words with my father about the failing standards of House Greengrass. Malfoy pompously said with a sneer. You do think very highly of yourself, Draco. That's a dangerous path to tread, isn't it? A silky voice smoothly intervened. Daphne looked up to see the newcomer, who turned out to be none other than Potter. Potter! Malfoy blanched, which was an interesting reaction in Daphne's opinion. She could see a momentary flash of fear in Malfoy's eyes. Well. This is not fair, is it? Half the Slytherin Quidditch team rounding up on my date like this. Rather unsporting, isn't it? Said Harry, with a tilted head while keeping his hands in his pockets, looking harmless. But Daphne knew Potter was anything but harmless. Potter! Don't think you can intimidate me like the rest of these. Montague never got to finish whatever he was going to say as a snake latched itself around the Slytherin chaser's neck and began hissing threateningly. Montague let out a shrill scream, attracting the attention of a section of students who were Slytherins. Daphne noticed only those among the Slytherin House and Durmstrang students were paying any attention to the ruckus caused by Montague. Most of her housemates had chosen to stay near the stairs to the dungeons. But Montague's screams should have echoed through the hallway, and yet a portion of the inhabitants of the entrance hall was clearly disengaged from what was happening. Squeeze his throat. $. Daphne heard hissing come out of Harry's mouth that made her blood chill. She was not the only one who gasped and watched helplessly as Montague struggled to breathe as the yellow-scaled serpent tightened its grip around his neck. Potter! Warrington snarled, raising his wand only to fall to his knees beside Montague with a snake squeezing down his neck. Don't kill! Daphne looked wide-eyed at the scene before her. She could feel the ripples of magic against her skin and her hand twitched to get a grip on her wand. It was only because of her disciplined mind she fought that urge. Instead, she looked at Harry Potter, who stood surrounded by Slytherins on all sides, with a sharp smile on his face. With Harry's hair swept back properly, Daphne could see the red lightning bolt scar on his forehead. It was a stark reminder to everyone, including herself, that Harry Potter was no ordinary wizard. Before Daphne stood one of the most intriguing, influential and perhaps powerful wizard in her generation. Some would say Potter is the most powerful wizard Britain has ever seen. After all, how else could a wizard survive the killing curse? It seems to me dear Draco here has a problem with me. Tell me, is it because of my mother? Half-blood you called me, was it, Draco? Harry walked around Malfoy like a predator looking at its prey. My father will. She could hear Malfoy stutter, which nearly made her giggle, but Tracy beat her to it. Her friend began openly laughing, which made Harry sporting an amused smile. Look at that, Draco! Your usual lines have become a laughable joke among your housemates. Why are you so obsessed with my ancestry? By calling me half-blood, do you seek to elevate yourself, little Malfoy? Harry nudged Draco, but the blonde remained petrified for some reason. Daphne looked confusedly as Draco began shaking in fear. Her eyes widened as three black serpents slowly poked their heads out of Draco's fine robes. The serpents began hissing and looked poised to strike at Draco, but she heard Harry hiss once more. The serpents seemed to settle and merely observed Draco, who had closed his eyes in fear and began sweating profusely. For your information, Draco, my father comes from a prestigious bloodline. He can claim descendants from one of the 23 families that defended the magical community from falling prey to foreign invaders. I believe my ancestors played a part in the formation of the Ministry of Magic. As for my mother, let's keep her ancestry a secret, said Harry, grabbing hold of Malfoy's blonde hair, and with a tug, Harry was now looking into a pair of terrified grey eyes. Or maybe you want to learn more about my mother, Malfoy? Please speak up, Malfoy. If you want to learn more, I can educate you about the intricacies of my blood. I'm sorry. Daphne could hear Draco whisper fearfully. I couldn't hear that, said Harry, letting Draco free from his grip. I'm sorry. Draco cried louder. But, Draco, you are apologizing to me. Why would you apologize to me, Draco? You should be apologizing to my date, said Harry, who proceeded to move to Daphne's side. I'm sorry, Greengrass, said Draco, still keeping his eyes firmly shut because of the serpents. That's good. What about you two, Warrington, Montague? I'm sorry. The two upperclassmen Slytherins apologized to her. Daphne eyed Harry, who broke out into a smile and began hissing again. Take your leave, noble serpents. Daphne, along with every Slytherin on this side of the entrance hall, watched the serpents scamper away, leaving the three boys to breathe normally. Well, I suggest you mind your own business rather than play these games with me. Consider that a bit of friendly advice for your continued long life and health. Trust me, you can't afford an enemy like me, said Harry, giving the assembled Slytherin house a sharp smile before turning towards Daphne, holding out his arm. Shall we? Daphne for a moment stood there, staring mesmerized into the bright green orbs of Harry. She could feel a subtle vibrancy of magic as she looped her arm with Harry's. From a young age, she has been taught to feel magic, as it was one of the affinities she inherited from her mother's family. She was more than sure she was feeling the ripples of magical surge because of the Parseltongue. Father was right. Parseltongue is indeed the song of nature, Daphne thought. Shall we, Daphne? Asked Harry. Straightening out her blue-lined boatneck dress, Daphne stared unflinchingly into Harry's eyes. Lead the way, Harry. Together they moved forward, and her housemates parted away to give them space. Suddenly Harry paused, causing her to look questioningly at her date. Oh, please do take care to keep this event amongst ourselves. I trust Slytherin House has students with the sense to know that if this event gets into the rumor mill or the Hogwarts staff, the whole house will get my retaliation. Do remember, you are living in the dungeons with hundreds of snake sculptures. You don't want to know which of those snakes takes command from a speaker of the noble tongue of serpents. Harry! Daphne hissed. Harry had the sense to look abashed. Of course you won't be harmed, Daphne, and you too, Tracy. Thanks. That surely lets me sleep soundly at night from now on, Potter. Tracy's snarky remark came just as quick as possible. Daphne shook her head and dragged Harry away before he made another scene with her housemates. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated as Harry Potter. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Just a quick reminder. There's only one more part left in the story, What If Ichigo Had a Different Zanpakuto, before we catch up with the author. So once again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the next project should be here on the channel. I'm currently considering these 3 fanfics. What if sign-in system in high school DxD? What if Ichigo awoke his true powers? What if Mangaka in One Piece world? Let me know which one you'd like to see next by voting in the poll. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.